There are secrets that a house keeps better than human memory. Secrets sealed behind walls, buried beneath layers of paint and silence, waiting patiently for someone to ask the right questions. I never asked those questions. Not until it was too late to get answers from the only person who could have given them to me. My name is Marlo Ashford. I am 37 years old, and I spent the first 23 years of my life in my childhood home on the outskirts of Eureka, California, a 3-story Victorian built in 1897 with high ceilings, ornate moldings, and that particular darkness that characterizes old houses, no matter how many lights you turn on. My mother, Aveline, lived there for 52 years. She never moved, even after my father Thaddeus died when I was 12. She died in March, in her bed, with the curtains drawn and her hands crossed over her chest, as if she were preparing for the coffin, long before her heart stopped beating. The funeral was small. My mother had no close friends, only acquaintances from church who came out of social obligation rather than genuine affection. I was an only child, or so I thought, so the task of emptying the house fell entirely to me. I returned to the house 3 days after the burial. April had just begun, but the California fog clung to the coast with wintry persistence. The house rose among the trees like something that had grown out of the earth rather than been built upon it, its dark gray walls blending into the cloudy sky. I opened the front door with the key I had carried on my keychain for years without ever using it. The air inside was thick and stale, as if the house had been holding its breath. Dust floated in the gray rays of light filtering through the dirty windows. Everything was exactly as I remembered it, and at the same time, completely strange. It was as if I had entered a museum dedicated to my own childhood. I started with the obvious: the kitchen, the dining room, the living room. Cardboard boxes I had bought were piled up in the entrance, waiting to be filled with 50 years of accumulated life. Clothes, books, dishes, old letters, the detritus of a solitary existence. But I couldn't concentrate. There was something about the house that distracted me, a persistent feeling that something was out of place. I couldn't pinpoint what it was exactly, just a subtle dissonance like a note out of tune in a symphony. On the 3rd day of work, as I was carrying boxes up to the 2nd floor, I stopped in the hallway. There were 5 doors: my old bedroom, my mother's bedroom, the bathroom, a storage room, and a 5th door leading to a guest room that we never had guests to use. I mentally counted the rooms from the outside. The layout didn't match. From the outside, the house was symmetrical, 3 windows on the 2nd floor on either side of the main entrance. But from the inside, I could only count 5 windows. 1 was missing. I stood in the hallway for what seemed like an eternity, feeling my pulse quicken for no apparent reason. It was just strange architecture, I told myself. Old houses have lost spaces, weird angles, walls that don't line up perfectly. It didn't mean anything, but that night, on my old childhood mattress that creaked with every movement, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that wasted space, about the missing window, about the feeling that the house was hiding something from me. The next morning, I measured the hallway with a tape measure I found in the garage. From my bedroom to the storage room, 42 feet. But the sum of the individual rooms only added up to 34 feet. 8 feet were missing, enough for a small room. I checked every wall in the hallway, tapping with my knuckles, listening for a change in sound. And there, between the storage room and the guest room, I found it. A section of wall that sounded hollow, different, as if there were an empty space behind it. I tore off the Victorian wallpaper, old wilted roses on a yellowish background. Underneath was plaster, but not the original plaster of the house. It was newer, rougher, applied without the craftsmanship of the rest of the walls, and there was no door. Just solid wall where my mind insisted there should be one. My breathing became shallow. My hands trembled as I ran my fingers over the uneven surface. Someone had sealed this room. Intentionally. Completely. Why? I went to the garage and found a sledgehammer and a crowbar. The weight of the tools in my hands felt like betrayal, as if I were about to break a pact I didn't even know I had made, but I couldn't stop myself. I needed to know. The first blow of the sledgehammer echoed through the house like a gunshot. The plaster cracked, revealing old wooden slats underneath. I struck again, and again. White dust filled the air, making me cough, but I didn't stop. When the hole was big enough, I stopped and looked inside with a flashlight. Darkness, but not an empty darkness. I could see shapes, furniture covered with sheets, a small bed, a desk. My heart was beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. I hit more, enlarging the hole until it was big enough to climb through. The air that came out of that room was different, older, like opening a tomb. I crouched down and entered, the flashlight slowly illuminating the space. It was a child's room, perfectly preserved, perfectly sealed, as if time had stopped the day they bricked up that door. There was a single bed with faded blue sheets, a small desk with a chair, bookshelves full of books, toys neatly arranged in boxes, clothes folded in an open wardrobe, everything covered in a thick layer of dust that glistened in the light of my flashlight like dirty snow. And on the walls, drawings, dozens of them, hundreds, stuck on with adhesive tape that had turned yellow and brittle over the years. I approached one, my legs shaking so much I could barely stand. It was a child's drawing made with crayons. Two figures, a tall man and a woman, drawn with the clumsy sticks and circles of a small child. Between them, two smaller figures, two children. Below, in shaky, uneven handwriting, "My Family," by Caspian. Caspian. The name struck something in my brain, like an echo from a half-forgotten dream. Did I know him? Had I heard that name before? No. I couldn't have known him. I was an only child. I always had been. My parents told me so. School records confirmed it. Family photos showed only 3 people: Mom, Dad, me. But here, in this sealed room, was evidence of another life, of another child. I picked up another drawing. This one showed a house, clearly this house, with its distinctive 3 stories and wrought iron fence out front. 2 windows on the second floor were colored bright yellow. One of them was my room. The other was this one. I kept looking. Each drawing was a window into an existence that had been completely erased. Scenes from everyday life, family breakfasts, games in the garden, a pet we never had, a black cat named Shadow, according to the careful label. And in each drawing there were 4 figures: Mom, Dad, me, and Caspian. My hands were shaking so badly that I dropped the flashlight. It rolled across the floor, casting crazy shadows on the walls before coming to rest, pointing toward the desk. I crawled over and opened the top drawer. Inside were notebooks. I pulled them out with hands that no longer felt like my own. The first notebook was math, simple addition and subtraction problems, written in the uneven handwriting of a child of perhaps 6 or 7. Some problems had gold stars stuck on them. Others had red correction marks. The second was a diary. The first entry was dated September 3rd, 1991. I was 5 years old at the time. Today I started school. Mommy made me a peanut butter sandwich. Marlo cried because he didn't want me to go. I told him I'd be back after school. He's my best friend. My best friend. The room began to spin. I sat on the dusty bed, the diary on my lap, reading entry after entry of a life I should remember, but was completely absent from my memory. October 15th, 1991. Marlo and I built a fort in the yard. Mommy brought us lemonade. Daddy said we are good architects. December 24th, 1991. Santa brought me a red bike. Marlo has a blue one. We are going for a ride tomorrow. February 14th, 1992. I made a card for Mommy and one for Marlo. Daddy says I'm a good big brother. Big brother. The word hit me like a punch in the stomach. Caspian was older than me, 2 years older according to the evidence in the notebooks, which meant that when he was 7, I was 5. We should have been inseparable. We should have shared memories, fights, secrets. But I couldn't remember anything. Absolutely nothing. I kept reading, desperately searching for some clue as to what had happened, why this room had been sealed off, why an entire child had been erased from our family history. The entries became more, spaced out as 1992 progressed. Shorter. The tone changed. March 3rd, 1992. I feel weird again. Mommy says it's just a cold. March 17th, 1992. The doctor came. I didn't like him. He asked a lot of questions. April soon, 1992. I have to stay in my room more now. Mommy says it's so I'll get better. Marlo can't come in. I miss him. The handwriting became shakier, harder to read. The pages had stains that could have been tears or just the deterioration of time. April 20th, 1992. Daddy and Mommy fight all the time. I can hear them even when they close the door. Daddy says we have to tell the truth. Mommy says it's better this way. I don't understand. May 1st, 1992. Today was the last day I saw Marlo. He came to my door and said my name. Mommy took him away quickly. He was crying. So was I. The last entry was dated May 8th, 1992. The handwriting was barely legible, shaky strokes that strayed from the lines. I feel really bad. Mom says I'm going to a better place soon. She says Marlo will be okay. She says it's better that he doesn't remember. I don't want him to forget me. We're brothers. Brothers don't forget each other. Please don't forget me, Marlo. And that was it. There were no more pages. The diary just stopped, like a life cut off mid-sentence. I don't know how long I sat on that bed, holding that notebook, as the weight of understanding slowly crushed me. My mother had erased her own son from existence. Not physically, which might have been understandable in a horrible and tragic sense if he had died. No, she erased him from memory, from family history, from my mind. I forced myself to stand up and keep searching. In the closet, I found children's clothes, sizes 6 to 8, all perfectly folded and preserved. On the shelves were books with names written on the first page. Caspian Ashford. Each item was further proof that he had existed, had lived, had been real. Under the bed, I found a shoebox. Inside were photographs. I took them out with trembling hands. And there was the irrefutable evidence. Family photos, but not the ones I remembered. These showed 4 people: Mom, Dad, me, and another child. A dark-haired boy with big eyes who looked so much like me that we could have been twins 2 years apart. Caspian. There were photos of the 2 of us playing, sharing a birthday cake, holding a puppy. Had we had a dog? I didn't remember any dog. In every photo, he looked at me with a mixture of protection and affection that only an older brother could have, and I looked at him as if he were my whole world. How was it possible that I didn't remember him? How could anyone completely forget another person, especially someone who had clearly been so important in my early life? I searched more frantically now, pulling sheets off furniture, checking every drawer, every corner. There had to be something else, something that explained what happened. At the back of the closet, behind a row of small shoes, I found another box. This one was metal, locked with a small padlock that broke easily when I pried it open with a screwdriver. Inside were medical documents. I read them by the flickering light of my flashlight, and with each page, the truth became clearer and more devastating. Caspian had a disorder, not a physical one, but a mental one. The documents used terms I recognized from my own psychology studies in college: early onset schizophrenia, psychotic episodes, visual and auditory hallucinations. There were notes from multiple doctors, each one bleaker than the last, recommendations for hospitalization, referrals to specialized institutions, and then, on a form with the logo of a psychiatric hospital in Sacramento, I found the final truth. Caspian had been institutionalized on May 15th, 1992. He was 7 years old, and he had never left. There were more documents in the box. Letters from the hospital, updates on his condition, requests from my mother to extend his stay, and then, at the bottom, a death certificate. Caspian Thaddeus Ashford. Died November 3rd, 1998. Cause of death, suicide. He was 13. Tears I didn't know were falling stained the paper in my hands. My brother had died 26 years ago, and I had never known. I had never mourned him. I had never visited his grave, because my mother had decided it was better that way. Better that I didn't know. Better that I forgot him completely. And she had succeeded. But how? How do you erase one child from another child's memory? I searched for more documents and found the answer in a letter from a child psychologist. They had used therapy, hypnosis, constant reinforcement of an alternative narrative. They had transformed every mention of Caspian into your imaginary friend, every real memory into just a dream. For months, maybe years, they had systematically reprogrammed me to forget my own brother, and it had worked perfectly. I found my own medical file in the box, notes from therapy sessions when I was 5, 6, 7 years old. The psychologist described my confusion about the imaginary friend and how I was progressing well in separating fantasy from reality, how I eventually stopped asking about Caspian, how I stopped looking for him, how finally I stopped remembering that he had ever existed. I felt sick, physically sick. I staggered out of the room and vomited in the hallway bathroom, my body rejecting not only food, but the horrible truth I had just discovered. When I could stand again, I returned to the room. There was something else I needed to find, something I knew had to be there. I found it at the bottom of the bottom drawer of the desk, a sealed envelope with my name written on the front. Not to Marlo when she's older, or anything like that. Just Marlo, in the shaky handwriting of a 7-year-old. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a drawing on it. 2 stick figures, one taller than the other, holding hands. Above it, in blue crayon, Brothers Forever. And below, in more careful handwriting, as if he had used all his concentration to write each word correctly. Marlo, if you ever find this, I want you to know that it's not your fault. Mommy says there's something wrong with my head. She says I see things that aren't real, and that scares you. She says it's better if you don't remember me so you won't be sad. But I will always remember you. You are my little brother, and I love you. I hope you are happy. I hope you have a good life. And someday, when it's all over, maybe we'll meet again and we can be brothers again. Please don't forget me. Caspian. The letter fell from my numb fingers. I spent the next 3 days in that sealed room, reading every notebook, looking at every photo, trying to recover 6 years of memories that had been stolen from me, trying to get to know the brother I never knew I had. I learned that he liked dinosaurs, that his favorite color was green, that he was afraid of thunderstorms but always pretended to be brave for me, that he taught me how to tie my shoes, that he defended me from older kids at the park, that he read me bedtime stories. I learned all of that from objects and papers because my memory refused to give me anything back. The brainwashing had been too thorough, too perfect. I found more documents in my mother's study. She had kept everything hidden in a locked drawer in her desk. Records of all the visits to the psychiatric hospital she never made. Letters from Caspian she never answered. Photos she had cut up to remove his image before framing them. And a diary. Her own diary. The first entry after Caspian's institutionalization was dated May 16, 1992. Today we sealed off Caspian's room. Thaddeus cried as we did it. He says I'm erasing our son, but he doesn't understand. Marlo is so small, so fragile. Caspian's episodes traumatized him. He saw him at his worst, terrified, screaming about monsters only he could see. Marlo had nightmares. He couldn't sleep. He cried constantly. The doctor says that if we remove all references to Caspian, if we create a consistent narrative, Marlo can heal. He can have a normal childhood. It's best for him. I have to believe it. I have to believe I'm doing the right thing. But it hadn't been the right thing to do. It had been cowardice. It had been choosing the comfortable lie over the painful truth. I kept reading, through years of justifications and rationalizations, how she convinced my father to keep the secret, how she convinced family and friends to never mention Caspian in front of me, how she transformed the truth of a sick son into the fiction of an only child. The final entry was from 3 weeks before his death. Marlowe is coming tomorrow for the funeral. No, not for the funeral. There is no funeral. Marlowe is coming to visit me. I'm confused. What was the secret? There was something important I must not forget. Something about a room. Something about... I can't remember. Dementia takes everything away. Maybe it's fair. Maybe this is my punishment for what I did. Forgetting, like I made him forget. There's something behind the walls. Something I sealed away long ago. What was it? Why can't I remember? Even in her illness, even as her own mind crumbled, she had never revealed the secret. She had taken it to her grave. Or almost. I found the location of Caspian's grave in the documents. A small cemetery 2 hours north, where the psychiatric hospital buried patients whose bodies were not claimed by relatives. I drove there in cold rain. The kind of rain that seems like it will never stop. The grave was simple. Just a small headstone with his name, dates of birth and death, and nothing else. No beloved son. No missed brother. Just a name and 2 dates, as if that was all his life had meant. I knelt in the mud in front of that stone and finally cried for real. I cried for the brother I never knew, even though I knew him for the first 5 years of my life. I cried for the memories that were stolen from me. I cried for the casual cruelty of parents who thought they could rewrite reality and that it would be better that way. I'm sorry, I whispered to the cold stone. I'm so sorry, Caspian. I didn't forget you by choice, but I did forget you, and that's almost worse. The wind shook the trees around me, and for a moment, just a fleeting moment, I could almost remember something. A laugh, a bigger hand holding mine, a voice saying, "Don't worry, little brother, I'll take care of you." But the memory faded as quickly as it came, and I didn't know if it was real or just my desperate mind creating what I wanted to be true. 2 weeks passed before I could return to the house. I had been staying in a hotel, unable to sleep in that place that I now knew was built on lies. But eventually, I had to finish what I had started. I had to empty the house. I had to decide what to do with the remains of 3 lives, not 2. I packed everything from Caspian's room with the care of an archaeologist handling precious artifacts. Every drawing, every notebook, every toy, everything went into special boxes, labeled and cataloged. I wasn't going to let him be forgotten again. The cut-up photos of my mother went in the trash. Her diary, too. I couldn't forgive her. Maybe someday, but not now. Not when the betrayal was so fresh, so deep. I hired someone to open up the wall properly, to restore the hallway to its original design. Caspian's room was accessible again, though it was empty now. Just bare walls and a lighter rectangle on the floor where the bed had been. I put the house up for sale a week later. I couldn't stay there. I couldn't live in a place where every room whispered secrets that should never have been kept. But before I left for the last time, I did something. On the wall of Caspian's room, with a black permanent marker, I wrote his name. Big. Impossible to ignore. Caspian Thaddeus Ashford lived here. 1985 to 1998. He was loved. He was remembered. He existed. Let the new owners paint over it if they want. Let them cover it with wallpaper or sand it down to white. But for now, for this moment, his name is on these walls. His existence is acknowledged. Now I live in Seattle, in a small apartment that has no history, no ghosts, no sealed rooms. I work at a mental health center, helping families with children who have psychiatric illnesses. I tell them that mental illness is no one's fault. That love does not mean hiding the truth. That children deserve to know, deserve to understand, deserve to grieve properly. I tell them everything my parents should have told me. I have Caspian's boxes in my closet. Sometimes I open them and look at the drawings, read the diary, hold the toys he once held. I try to remember. I close my eyes and search the deepest corners of my mind for some fragment, some echo of those first 5 years. Sometimes I think I find something, a flash of laughter, a feeling of security, the memory of a hand on my shoulder. But I don't know if these are real memories or just desperate wishes taking shape. What I do know is this: Caspian existed. He was my brother. He loved me. And even though they forced me to forget him, even though they stole years of my life and his, even though he died alone in a hospital thinking I had abandoned him, he will not be forgotten again. I'm writing his story, everything I learned from those documents, those drawings, that diary. I'm writing about a boy who loved his younger brother enough to write him a letter, knowing he would probably never read it. A boy who asked not to be forgotten, even as his family actively worked to erase him. This is his story. It is my story. It is the story of a crime that left no bodies, but killed something just as important. The truth, the memory, the connection between two brothers. And maybe, just maybe, by telling it, by keeping his name alive, I can begin to forgive myself for the crime of having forgotten him. Even if I had no choice, even if I was a victim too, because in the end that's the most horrible thing of all. Not that they lied to me, although they did. Not that they stole my memories, although they did. But that when Caspian wrote that letter, when he begged, "Please don't forget me," it was already too late. I had already forgotten him, and every night before I go to sleep, I whisper in the dark, "I'm sorry, brother. I remember you now. I promise I remember you now." And I wish, more than anything in the world, that somehow, somewhere, he can hear me. "Brothers don't forget," he wrote. But sometimes, family forces you to, and living with that truth is a sealed room you can never reopen, a space in your heart that remains empty because you never knew something was missing until it was too late to fill it again. That is my home now. Not the one in Eureka, but the one I carry inside me. A structure full of rooms I will never know are there, of memories sealed behind walls I will never be able to completely tear down. And somewhere in that inner house, a 7-year-old boy still waits for his younger brother to find him. He waits, and he will continue to wait until we are both free. There are moments that divide your life into two irreconcilable halves, before and after. The moment you discover that everything you thought you knew about yourself is a lie so carefully constructed that even your own memories conspire against the truth. For me, that moment came in the form of a photo album hidden in my parents' attic. My name is Saffron Delacroix, or at least that's the name I've used for the past 28 years. Now, after everything I've discovered, I'm no longer sure of anything, not even my own name. It all started 3 months ago, when my parents, Larkin and Ondine, finally decided to move out of the house where I had grown up on the outskirts of Burlington, Vermont. It was a decision they had put off for years, but winter was becoming too difficult for them to handle, and the large Victorian house, with its 3 stories and labyrinthine attic, was too much to maintain. They would be moving to a smaller condo in Florida, a place with palm trees and no stairs. They asked me to come and help pack, to sort through decades of family accumulation. "You decide what you want to keep," my mother said on the phone, her voice tinged with that performative melancholy she always used when she wanted to sound more emotional than she really was. "There are a lot of things from your childhood, photos, toys, documents. You should go through everything before we donate or throw it away." I arrived on a Saturday in September, when the leaves were beginning to change color and the air had that autumnal edge that always made me feel nostalgic. The house looked smaller than I remembered, as if it had shrunk in my absence. Or maybe I had grown too big for the space that had once been my whole world. My parents greeted me with obligatory hugs and cold tea. We spent the first hour chatting about trivialities, my job as an editor in Boston, their upcoming move, the weather. Conversations designed to fill the silence without saying anything real. Then my mother took me to the attic. "There are boxes and boxes of stuff up there," she said, handing me a large flashlight. "The electricity in the attic is spotty. Take your time. Bring down whatever you want to keep." The attic had always been my favorite place as a child. A space full of shadows and dust, of old trunks and furniture covered with white sheets like ghosts. It was a place to explore, to create imaginary worlds, to hide when the real world became too overwhelming. But I hadn't been up there in years. The wooden staircase creaked under my feet as I climbed, each step emitting a groan of protest. The attic door was ajar, and when I pushed it open completely, the stale air hit me like a solid wall. The smell of old wood, yellowed paper, and something else I couldn't identify, something that made me think of buried secrets. The afternoon light filtered weakly through the single round window, illuminating millions of dust particles dancing in the rays. Boxes were stacked everywhere, some marked with my name in faded marker: saffron, school, saffron baby clothes, saffron toys. I started with the obvious, opening boxes at random, finding the expected remnants of a suburban childhood: report cards with predictable A's, certificates of participation in the school choir, photos of ballet recitals where I wore a pink tutu that itched terribly. Everything was exactly as it should be. Everything was normal. Perhaps that's why, when I found the album, I knew immediately that something was wrong. It was at the bottom of an old trunk I didn't remember seeing before, hidden under wool blankets that smelled of mothballs and time. It wasn't like the other family albums that were neatly organized in the library downstairs. This one was different. Old, with a worn leather cover and yellowed pages protected by fragile tissue paper. It had no title. It had no label. It just existed quietly, waiting. I took it out with hands that were already beginning to shake for no apparent reason. When I opened it, the smell of old photographs flooded me. That particular aroma of decomposed chemicals and preserved memories. The first page showed a typical family photo: a picnic in the park, 4 people smiling at the camera. My mother, noticeably younger, with shoulder-length hair. My father with less gray hair and more hair. And 2 little girls. 2 girls. One of them was clearly me. I was maybe 5 years old with uneven pigtails and a yellow dress that I recognized from other photos. I was smiling, showing a missing tooth. But the other girl? I didn't recognize the other girl at all. She was a few years older than me, maybe 8 or 9. Dark blonde hair, freckles on her nose, a crooked smile. She was wearing a blue t-shirt with a unicorn on it. And my father had his arm around her shoulders in exactly the same protective way that he had his other arm around mine. My heart began to beat faster. I turned the page. More photos. The same girl, in different settings. A Christmas photo in front of our tree with the same decorations I remembered, the same red brick fireplace. The girl was opening a present, laughing. I was next to her, looking at her with obvious adoration. Another photo. The 2 of us at the beach. She was holding my hand as the waves lapped at our ankles. Her hair was blowing in the wind. I was looking up at her, as if she were the most important person in the world. Photo after photo. Birthdays, Easter, Halloween, her dressed as a witch, me as a pumpkin. Family meals, school days, all showing this girl as an integral part of our family. Who the hell was she? A cousin. But I didn't remember any cousins. My mother was an only child, and my father had a brother who lived in California and rarely visited. We had never been close to our extended family. A friend. But what friend would appear in so many intimate family photos, in so many private moments? I kept turning pages, my confusion slowly transforming into something colder, darker, because in all these photos, I looked at her with love, with trust, with the intimacy that only comes from constant proximity, and I didn't have a single memory of her, not one. I came to a photo that made me stop completely. It was inside our house, in the living room. Christmas again, but a different year. I was maybe 7 years old. I was curled up on the sofa, asleep, my head resting on the girl's shoulder. She was awake, looking at the camera with a soft, protective smile. Her arm was around me. The photo conveyed something unmistakable. These were not two girls who barely knew each other. This was intimacy. This was family. But I didn't remember her. I didn't remember her face, her voice, her name. Nothing. I closed the album with trembling hands and sat on the dusty floor of the attic, trying to control my breathing. There had to be an explanation. There had to be. Maybe I had amnesia. Maybe a childhood accident had erased some memories. But no, that didn't make sense. I remembered my childhood with reasonable clarity. I remembered school, friends, family vacations. I remembered being an only child, a fact that had been central to my identity. My parents always talked about our one and only precious daughter. I'd never had to share attention, resources, love. Or had I? I searched more frantically in the trunk. Underneath where the album had been, I found more things. A shoebox full of letters. I opened them with clumsy fingers. They were letters from teachers, all addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Delacroix about the progress of their daughter Vesper. Vesper, a name I had never heard in my life. The letters dated from the years when I was between 5 and 9 years old. Vesper is an exceptional student. Vesper has adapted well to the transition. Vesper continues to show leadership in the classroom. Vesper, I kept searching. I found report cards, birth certificates, medical records, and then I saw it. A Vermont birth certificate. Parents, Larkin Delacroix and Ondine Delacroix. Name of child, Vesper Eloise Delacroix. Date of birth, 3 years before mine. I had a sister, and I didn't have a single memory of her. The walls of the attic seemed to close in around me. The air grew thicker, harder to breathe. I grabbed the album, the box of documents, and staggered down the stairs, nearly falling in my haste. My parents were in the kitchen, drinking wine and talking about what furniture to take to Florida. When I walked in, holding the album against my chest like a shield, they fell silent immediately. And in that silence, in the way their faces turned pale, in how my mother dropped her glass, which crashed onto the tile floor but didn't break, just rolled, spilling red wine like blood. I knew it wasn't my memory that was faulty. It was the truth they had fed me my entire life. Who is Vesper? My voice sounded strange, hollow. Who is the girl in these photos? My father stood up so abruptly that his chair fell backward. My mother froze, one hand on her throat, her eyes huge. Saffron, my father began, but he didn't know how to finish the sentence. Who is Vesper? Each word was a hammer blow. Honey, my mother finally said, in that soft, condescending voice she used when she wanted to calm me down. Sit down. Let us explain. I don't want to sit down. I want answers. I found an entire album of photos. Letters. Her birth certificate. Did I have a sister? Why didn't you tell me? Why don't I remember her? My father and mother looked at each other. An entire conversation passed between them in that exchange of glances. And then, my mother sighed. She was your sister, she said softly. Your older sister. The words hit me like a physical punch. Was? What happened to her? She died, my father replied, his voice hoarse. When you were 8. A car accident. It was terrible. Devastating. And you just decided never to tell me. My voice rose. You decided to erase her completely from my life, from our family history. Saffron, you were very young, my mother said, approaching with her hands outstretched as if she were approaching a wild animal. The trauma of losing her nearly destroyed you. You didn't eat, you didn't sleep, you didn't talk. The therapist said the best way to help you heal was to create a new narrative, one where you didn't have to live with the constant pain of her absence. So they lied to me. For 20 years. We protected you, my father corrected. But something didn't add up. Something in their voices, in how they avoided looking me directly in the eye. If she died in a car accident, Where is she buried? Why did we never visit her grave? Why are there no photos of her anywhere in the house? Another silence. Longer, darker. Saffron, it's not that simple, my mother began, but I wasn't listening anymore. I was opening the album again, looking at the photos with new eyes. And then I saw it. Something I had overlooked the first time. In one of the photos, there was a newspaper on the table in the background. I could read the date in the corner, August 15th, 2004. I was 9 years old in 2004, but in the photo, I looked about 5. The dates didn't add up. This photo, I said, pointing to it. It says it's from 2004, but I looked much older in 2004. My mother turned even paler. I flipped through the pages quickly, looking for more evidence, more inconsistencies, and I found them. In a Halloween photo, there was a sign in the background of a neighbor's house, garage sale, October 2006. But in the photo, I looked maybe 6 years old. In 2006, I was 11. The dates didn't match. Nothing matched. These photos, I said slowly, horror growing in my stomach like something alive. They're not from when I was a child. They're from before, much before. Saffron. My mother reached out a hand to me. Who am I? The scream came from deep within me. Who the hell am I really? And in the silence that followed, in how my parents looked at each other with pure panic in their eyes, I understood the truth. It wasn't Vesper, who had been erased from the family history. It was me. I was the one who shouldn't exist. I ran. I ran up the stairs, back to the attic, searched more frantically through the boxes. There had to be more evidence, more proof. I had to understand what was going on. I found another box, this one marked only with a year, 2003. I opened it with hands that were shaking so badly I could barely hold anything. Inside were medical documents, lots of them, from a children's psychiatric hospital in New Hampshire. Patient, Vesper Eloise Delacroix. Age 12. Diagnosis, dissociative identity disorder. Psychotic episodes, delusions. I read page after page of clinical notes. Vesper, my supposed sister, had been deeply ill. The notes described episodes where she insisted there was another girl in the house, a girl younger than her that she had created in her mind, a girl she called Saffron. The patient has constructed an elaborate alternate identity, one of the doctor's notes said. She speaks of Saffron as if she were her younger sister. She has created detailed memories of shared events. When confronted with the reality that she is an only child, she becomes severely agitated. Intensive treatment is recommended. No. No, no, no. I kept reading, even though every word was like a knife. The parents report that Vesper sometimes becomes Saffron, adopting a different voice, different mannerisms, different personality. During these episodes, she insists that she is a 5-year-old girl named Saffron and does not recognize her own identity as 12-year-old Vesper. The pages fell from my trembling hands. Treatment progressing. Vesper is beginning to integrate the identities. There is hope for full recovery if the parents maintain a consistent narrative and do not reinforce the alternate identity. And then, the last note, dated September 2008. Significant success in therapy. Vesper has completely rejected the Saffron identity. She no longer talks about an imaginary sister. Parents have been instructed to maintain this integration by avoiding any reference to the alternate identity. It is recommended that any evidence that could trigger a regression be destroyed. But they hadn't destroyed everything. They had hidden some things in the attic. Why? I searched further. There had to be something else, and I found it. A thin folder with "highly confidential" stamped in red across the top. Inside were only a few documents, but they were enough to completely shatter my reality. The first was a court order from 2008. Legal name change from Vesper Eloise Delacroix to Saffron Vesper Delacroix. Requested by the parents. Approved by the court as part of psychiatric treatment. The second was a letter from a different psychiatrist, one who clearly disagreed with the first one's approach. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Delacroix, I must express my deep concern about your decision to proceed with Vesper's name change and identity reconstruction. While I understand that you are desperate to help your daughter, erasing her original identity and completely replacing it with her dissociative alter ego is not treatment. It is participating in the delusion. Vesper needs to integrate her identities, not abandon one entirely. I strongly urge you to reconsider this course of action. But they hadn't reconsidered. They had gone ahead. The third document was the most chilling. A series of police photographs of me, or Vesper, whoever I was. The photos were dated 2008. They showed a 12-year-old girl with bruises on her arms and scratches on her face. The accompanying reports described a violent episode where the subject, during a personality shift, severely self-harmed while attempting to make Saffron real. The report said that Vesper had tried to physically change her appearance to look more like how she imagined Saffron looked. She had cut her own hair unevenly. She had injured herself trying to look smaller, more fragile, more like an 8-year-old than a 12-year-old. And my parents, instead of helping her integrate her fragmented identity, had simply decided to let her be Saffron permanently. They had found an unscrupulous psychiatrist willing to treat her this way. They had legally changed her name. They had destroyed evidence of her previous life. They had created an entirely new narrative. They had killed Vesper and allowed Saffron to live. Except I wasn't Saffron. Saffron had never been real. She was just a dissociative identity created by a traumatized, sick child. I was Vesper. I had always been Vesper. And everything I thought I knew about myself was a lie. I lay on the attic floor, surrounded by evidence of a life I was supposed to have lived but couldn't remember, and felt my mind trying to process the impossible. How could this be me in the photos? That 12-year-old girl, clearly older, clearly different. But at the same time, that girl was me. The document said so. The photograph showed it. My real birth certificate said Vesper Eloise Delacroix, born in 1996, not 1999, as I had always believed. Had I been living as an alternate identity for 20 years? Was my entire existence as Saffron just an extension of a psychotic episode that had never ended? I stumbled back down the stairs, barely able to stand. My parents were still in the kitchen, but now they were both sitting down, looking decades older than they had an hour ago. I know everything, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I know I'm not Saffron, that I never was. I'm Vesper. My mother began to cry. My father just stared at me with empty eyes. Why? I asked. Why did you do this? Why didn't you really help me? Why did you just erase who I was and let me be someone else? Because you were dying, my father finally said, his voice breaking. Vesper was dying. You didn't eat when you were Vesper. You barely spoke. Only when you became Saffron did you seem happy, functional, alive. The doctors said it was a coping mechanism that you would eventually integrate both identities. But you never did. And when you turned 12 and the episodes became more violent, when you started hurting yourself, trying to physically become Saffron, we were afraid you would kill yourself. So you decided to kill me, I said bitterly. You killed Vesper and let Saffron live. We let you live, my mother corrected between sobs. Saffron was you. It was who you wanted to be. It was the version of you that could be happy. But it wasn't real. I'm 3 years older than I think I am. I've been living a lie for 2 decades. You've been living, my father insisted, and that's what mattered. Look how well you did. You finished college, got a good job, have friends, a life. Vesper would never have had that. Vesper was too broken. The twisted logic of their words made me sick. What about my memories, my childhood as Saffron, of being 5 years old in 2004? None of that really happened. "Your memories are real," my mother said softly. "They are the memories that Saffron, that you, created when you were 12 during your dissociative episodes. Your mind constructed an entire childhood for Saffron, detailed and consistent memories. And when we let you be Saffron permanently, those memories became your reality. So you spent 2 decades perpetuating my delusion." "We spent 2 decades letting you be happy," my father replied. "Is that really so bad?" I looked at these people I believed to be my parents, who technically were my parents, I suppose, but now they were strangers, conspirators, architects of a lie so big it had consumed my entire life. "What else did you lie to me about?" I asked. "What else in my life is fake?" They looked at each other again, and in that look I saw that there was more, much more. "Tell me," I demanded. My mother took a deep breath. "Your memory of going to high school in Burlington. You never went to that school. You went to a special school in New Hampshire, one for children with psychiatric disorders. But when you permanently became Saffron at 12, we transferred you to Burlington and enrolled you as if you were 3 years younger. No one questioned anything. You were small for your age, and with the legal name change, the paperwork was perfect. So my entire education is a lie. My classmates were actually 3 years older than me, not my own age. Technically, yes. What else?" Silence. "What else?" My father ran a hand over his face. "Your boyfriend, in college, Reed. The reason he broke up with you so abruptly in your junior year." I remembered that, or I thought I did. It had been devastating. One night we were planning our future together, and the next he wasn't answering my calls. "We told him the truth," my father admitted, "about who you really were. He thought we should have told you sooner, that you had a right to know. When we disagreed, he threatened to tell you himself. So, we made sure he left." "How did you make sure?" My mother avoided my gaze. His father worked at my law firm. I explained the situation to him. We transferred him to an office in California. Reed went with him. We made it very clear to him that if he contacted you, if he said anything to you, there would be legal and professional consequences. You threatened him. You threatened a 20-year-old boy to keep your secret. To protect you, my mother insisted. It was always to protect you. I laughed. It was a hollow, broken laugh. Protect me? They stole my identity. They stole years of my life. They made me believe I was someone who never existed. But you're happy, my father said. As Saffron, you're happy. That's what we wanted. No, I said softly. As Saffron, I'm living in a delusion. And you are just as guilty as I am. I looked at the album I was still holding, the photos of Vesper looking at me, a girl who had been so traumatized, so broken, that she had created an imaginary sister to endure her pain. And that imaginary sister had become her complete escape from a reality that was too painful to inhabit. Why was she so traumatized? I asked suddenly. What happened to Vesper that caused her to dissociate so severely? Another silence, the longest yet. Tell me, I commanded. I deserve to know. Vesper deserves to have her story told. My mother closed her eyes. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. When Vesper was 8 years old, she was attacked by a neighbor, a man we trusted. He hurt her for months before we realized what was happening. The world stopped when she finally told us, when we found the courage to report it. The case went to trial. Vesper had to testify. She had to sit on that stand and describe what he had done to her while he looked at her. The jury didn't convict him. They said there wasn't enough evidence, that it was a child's word against that of a respectable adult. Tears were streaming down my mother's face now. Vesper broke after that, completely. She stopped talking, she stopped eating, and then one day she was suddenly smiling again, laughing, playing. But she insisted she was Saffron, that Vesper no longer existed, that she had gone somewhere safe. And you just Let her go. What else could we do? My mother sobbed. The girl we had known was gone. But this new personality, Saffron, was happy. She was innocent. She didn't carry the trauma. How could we force her to go back to being Vesper, knowing what she would have to remember? I understood then. I didn't excuse what they had done, but I understood it. They had let their daughter escape from unbearable trauma by hiding inside an alternate identity. And when that identity had proven to be more functional, more capable of living a normal life, they had made the decision to let Vesper die and Saffron live. Except Vesper had never died. She had been here all along, buried under layers of false memory and years of reinforcing a lie, and now she was waking up. What happened to him? I asked. The man who hurt me. He died, my father said quickly. 3 years later. A car accident. But something in his tone made me doubt him. Was it really an accident? Silence. Dad, was it really an accident? My father looked me straight in the eye for the first time in this conversation. Yes, he said firmly. It was an accident. He lost control of his car on an icy road. He died instantly. I didn't believe him, but I didn't ask any more questions either. I stood there in that kitchen, holding the physical remains of a life I didn't remember living, trying to reconcile two incompatible realities. I was Saffron. I was Vesper. I was both. I was neither. What do I do now? I finally whispered. You live, my mother said. You continue to be who you've been. Saffron, the life you've built is real, even if it started with a lie. But now I know the truth. I can't unknow this. No, my father admitted, but you can choose what you do with that knowledge. I looked at the album again, the photos of Vesper staring back at me from the past, begging to be remembered, and the photos where I appeared, the younger girl Vesper had created to protect herself from unbearable pain. Who was I really? The traumatized girl who had fled her identity, or the escape identity that had become more real than the original? The answer, I realized with growing horror, was that it no longer mattered. I had lived as Saffron for so long that this was my functional reality, regardless of documents that said otherwise. But now I carried Vesper's knowledge within me as well. The trauma that had broken me, the reason I had needed to escape. We were the same person. We always had been. I left that house the next day and haven't been back since. My parents moved to Florida as planned. I haven't answered their calls. I've spent the last 3 months in therapy, trying to process who I really am. The documents say I'm 31, not 28. That I was born in 1996, not 1999. That my legal name is Saffron Vesper Delacroix, but that I used to be just Vesper. Sometimes I have flashes of memories. I don't know if they're real or constructed, if they're Vespers or Saffrons or some hybrid of both. A man with a kind face who turns into a monster. A courtroom with lights that are too bright. A dark room where I hid inside my own mind, creating a little sister I could protect because I hadn't been able to protect myself. My therapist says that eventually I will be able to integrate both identities into a coherent whole. That I can be both Vesper and Saffron, acknowledging the trauma that created me while embracing the life I have built. But some nights, when I look in the mirror, I'm not sure who is looking back at me. Is it the 28-year-old girl I thought I was, or the 31-year-old woman I really am? Is it the traumatized victim who never healed properly, or is it the dissociative identity that became more real than the original? The scariest answer is that there is no difference. I am all of them simultaneously. I am a person whose story was rewritten so completely that even my own mind conspires against the truth. And the worst, the absolutely most terrifying thing is this. Now that I know the truth, I can't go back to ignorance, but I also can't move forward completely, knowing that everything I believed about myself was a lie. I am stuck in limbo between two identities, two stories, two lives. And there is no photo album, no document, no amount of therapy that can tell me definitively who I really am, because the honest answer is, I don't know anymore, and maybe I never will. The album is in my closet now. Sometimes I take it out and look at the photos of Vesper, searching for some recognition, some spark of true memory. But she remains a stranger who has my face, but lived a life I can't remember. And Saffron, the girl I thought I was, turns out to have never existed outside the fragmented imagination of a traumatized child. So who is left? Just me. Whoever that means. And that's the real horror. Not that they lied to me, although they did. Not that they stole my identity, although they did. But that after all, after discovering the truth, I still don't know who I am. And maybe that's the biggest lie of all. The idea that there is a true me waiting to be discovered. Maybe there are just layers of construction, each as real as the last, and the truth is that identity was never solid to begin with. Maybe we're all just stories we tell ourselves, and mine just happened to have been written by other people. That's the part that keeps me awake at night. Not the trauma, not the lie, but the realization that if my identity could be so completely rewritten once, what's to stop it from happening again? How do I know that the person I am now, processing all of this, isn't just another layer of dissociation? How do I know that any of my memories are real? I don't. And that uncertainty is a prison I can never escape. Because once you lose trust in your own mind, in your own story, in your own sense of identity, what's left? My name is Thorne Whitaker, and my life has been a tapestry woven with threads of silence and fog deep in Jericho, Vermont, a cursed corner of the northeastern United States, where the Adirondack Mountains rise like misshapen sentinels, guarding secrets that the Lumwell wind carries away like dead leaves. I was born in 1990, under a sky that wept hail like glass tears, in a cabin that creaks with the whispers of the dead, and I grew up hearing the river whisper names that were not mine. I am not a storyteller. I am a guardian of abysses, a man who walks paths where the earth opens like a festering wound, revealing black roots that entangle the soul. But there is a story that devours me from within, one that does not belong entirely to me, but was bequeathed to me as a curse, told by my mother, Elowen Whitaker, formerly Hale, daughter of my grandfather Caspian, on a night in October 2008, when the foliage burned in shades of coagulated blood and the wind moaned like a child drowning in the forest. She told it to me, not in the warmth of a fireplace, but in the dim light of the porch, where the shadows of the pine trees stretched like skeletal fingers scratching at the rotten boards. She was 55 then, but she looked like an exhumed relic, her red hair now gray as cold ashes, sprinkled with white strands that glistened in the moonlight like silver veins in a tomb, and her eyes, the color of the Lamwell mud after a storm, sunken into sockets that time had carved like graves. His hands, trembling and gnarled, clutched a rosary of bone beads, a reliquary that had belonged to his mother, carved with Celtic symbols that no one in Jericho understood, brought from the Scottish Highlands by ancestors fleeing famine and witches. "Thorne, my sharp-tongued child," she said, in a voice that scraped like gravel under boots. "This is not a bedtime story. It is the pus of our blood, a secret that rots at the roots of this family, like an unburied corpse. I tell you this so that you may bear it, so that it does not surprise you in your dreams, when the darkness whispers your true name, that of a bastard born of violence and knives." It was not a fluid story. It was a staccato exorcism, punctuated by pauses, where she lost herself in visions, murmuring prayers in Gaelic that sounded like curses. I listened, sitting on the frozen step, my breath forming clouds that the cold devoured, because in Jericho, stories are not heard. They are inhaled like toxic smoke, and once inside, they corrode the lungs. My mother spoke of her youth, of a man named Draven Locke, my biological father, a specter of ink and rage who had been erased from family photos with rusty scissors, and of how my grandfather Caspian, a titan of wood and contained fury, had slit his throat on a June night in 1989 under a moon that bled silver light over the forest. The motive was an abyss of domestic brutality. Draven, a southern demon with eyes of ice, had tormented Elowen for years, culminating in a beating that left her on the brink of death and in a coma, while Caspian, with a pocket knife inherited as a cursed talisman, slit that monster's throat in self-defense, or so the law ruled, releasing him after months in a cell that smelled of mold and remorse. But my mother painted it not as justice, but as a pact with the shadows, a murder that summoned ghosts that still haunt our cabin, whispering in the cracks in the walls. It all goes back to the summer of 1987, Thorne, Elowen confessed to me when she, was 22 and Jericho was a rotten womb of broken dreams. The town was not the snowy mausoleum you know now, with its cobblestone streets cracked like varicose veins and houses sinking into the earth like half-buried coffins. Back then, it was teeming with sordid life, an anthill of lumberjacks with axes stained with sap and accidental blood, miners digging veins of black slate in the hills, extracting not gold, but the very darkness of the earth. The Lemoyle River meandered like a biblical serpent, its murky waters reflecting weeping willows that hung like gallows, and the air thick with the smell of burning resin and the sweet stench of decay in the swamps. My grandfather, Caspian Hale, was the patriarch of that rot, a 53-year-old widower, forged in the crucible of early loss, with a body bent like an old willow, calloused hands that looked like raven's claws, capable of carving intricate furniture or splitting skulls with equal precision, and eyes gray as forest fire smoke, piercing the soul like nails in a coffin. Caspian had buried my grandmother, your great-grandmother, Isolde McTavish, a Scottish immigrant with eyes green as henbane poison, in 1965, during a birth that twisted in the cabin like a failed pagan ritual. Snow fell in thick flakes like shrouds as she screamed, her belly opening in a torrent of blood that soaked the Irish linen sheets, and Dr. Ephraim Quillen, a drunk with gin breath and trembling hands, arrived riding his lame mare, only to declare the child and mother dead in a whisper that smelled of failure. Caspian dug the grave himself in the Hillview Cemetery, under a crooked pine tree that is now said to moan on windy nights, and raised Elowen, his only flower in that desert of pain, with the ferocity of a wounded wolf. Hale's cabin, nestled on the edge of Blackthorn Forest, a maze of black pines and ghostly birches, where locals swore they saw wandering lights and heard howls that were not coyotes, was both a sanctuary and a prison. Dark log walls that sweated sap in the heat, a home where the fire in the hearth cast shadows that danced like Celtic demons, and a basement where Caspian kept tools that looked like medieval instruments of torture. Elowen was his broken jewel, a young woman of ethereal, fragile beauty, with hair that cascaded in rusty copper waves to her waist, translucent skin dotted with constellations of freckles that looked like witch marks, and a laugh that, on her best days, was like the tinkling of silver bells in an abandoned church. But beneath that facade lay a deep vulnerability, a crack inherited from Isolde, night visions of hooded figures in the forest, dreams where the Lemoyle dragged her through gorges of black water, whispering prophecies of betrayal and blood. Caspian attributed it to Scottish melancholy and kept her close, working in the Quillen brothers' general store. Ephraim, now sober but marked by guilt, and his twin brother Thaddeus, a stooped bachelor with rat eyes and perpetually musty tobacco breath. There, among dusty shelves of moldy flour, rusty nails, and tins of canned goods that reeked of stale metal, Elowen sold packaged dreams to a town that devoured them with insatiable hunger. It was a scorching Tuesday in July 1987 when fate That weaver of nightmares spun its first sinister knot. The sun hung in the sky like a bloodshot eye, causing the asphalt of Main Street, a dusty thoroughfare flanked by rotten wooden saloons and a motel where neon lights flickered false promises, to ripple in heat waves that distorted reality. The shop door creaked like a lament as it opened, and Draven Locke entered, a stranger who seemed to spring from the cracks of the southern hell. He stood nearly 6 feet tall, a colossus of wiry muscle wrapped in a sweat-soaked white shirt that clung to his torso like a second skin, revealing faded tattoos. A snake coiled around a dagger on his pectoral, a twisted crucifix on his forearm that smelled of old ink and unconfessed sins. His hair, black as tar from an oil well, was slicked back with pomade that left a sweet cloying trail, like the perfume of a perfumed corpse, and his jaw was a block of granite chiseled by contained rage. But it was his eyes that hooked you, wells of glacial blue, cold as the heart of a glacier, absorbing light and returning only emptiness, an abyss where you could fall and find no bottom. Draven was 28, or so he said, with a drawling accent from the swamps of Louisiana, south of misty bayous where alligators devoured sinners and voodoo whispers lingered in the shadows of cypress trees. He introduced himself as a traveling electrician, but he was an outcast with a fake diploma in the pocket of his cracked leather jacket, fleeing debts in Baton Rouge, and an alcoholic father who had whipped him with leather straps until he was left with scars that snaked across his back like maps of hell. In Jericho, he was an exotic anomaly, a breath of humid heat in a place of bone-chilling cold, a predator among prey. The women of the town looked at him with forbidden hunger, the men with distrust bordering on hatred. A southern wolf among Yankee sheep, Sheriff Amos Blackwood would growl in the saloon, a mastodon with a bristly mustache and eyes that never blinked, even in the face of death. But Thorn. Elowen was the first to fall, mesmerized by that gaze that promised ecstasy and ruin. He asked for electrical cables and a flashlight to repair a partner's generator at the sawmill, his voice a deep purr that vibrated in his chest like the buzzing of a swarm of wasps. Elowen, behind the splintered oak counter, looked up from her account book, a dusty tome filled with numbers that danced like runes, and felt a visceral tug in her gut, as if an invisible claw were dragging her toward him. Her cheeks flushed crimson, a blush that betrayed the rapid pulse beneath her faded cotton blouse, and he smiled, a slow predatory curve that revealed teeth yellowed by tobacco, like wolf fangs. "Miss, with a smile like yours, you could light up the entire county of Chittenden without the need for wires or light bulbs," he murmured, leaning over the counter until his breath, a mixture of chewed mint and something darker, like turned earth, brushed her skin. She laughed, a nervous sound that broke the oppressive silence of the store, and for the first time since Isolde's death, the Hale cabin was filled with unholy visitors. Draven appearing at dusk like a specter, with bouquets of wildflowers plucked from the riverbanks, thorny climbing roses that pricked fingers like reminders of pain, bottles of homemade cider fermented in stolen barrels, stinging the tongue like sweet poison, and hypnotic tales of New Orleans, cobblestone streets where jazz invoked the lows of the dead, Mississippi rivers singing laments of drowned souls, and brothels where women sold not only bodies, but fragments of cursed eternity. Caspian smelled it from the beginning, that stench of southern sulfur disguised as charm. "It's a crow with peacock feathers, daughter," he warned her one July night, while sharpening his wood axe under the flickering light of a kerosene lamp that cast dancing shadows like restless spirits. The blade sang against the stone, a whistle that sounded like an omen. "His eyes do not love, they devour. Watch him, Elowen, or he will tear your heart out like a vulture." She dismissed it with a light laugh, attributing it to the paternal zeal of an old gray wolf. But deep down, a chill ran through her, like the touch of cold fingers on the back of her neck. The courtship accelerated like a fever. Sunset walks along the Blackthorn Trail, where the trees whispered in forgotten tongues and fireflies flashed like the eyes of mischievous fairies. Impromptu dinners on the porch, with Lamoille trout roasted on skewers, dripping with sizzling fat. And nights when Draven kissed her with a hunger that bordered on violence, his large hands exploring her body like a cartographer of conquered territories, leaving subtle bruises that she interpreted as marks of passion. In September, under a post-storm rainbow, bleeding colors across the sky, they were married in the Jericho Methodist Chapel, a time-bleached wooden shack with cracked stained glass windows that filtered light into fragments of broken rubies and sapphires, and a bell tower where pigeons nested like trapped souls. The ceremony was a macabre ritual in its simplicity. 15 gaunt witnesses, including the Quillen brothers with their faces wrinkled like ancient maps, Pastor Sister Miriam, an obese matron with a hoarse crow's voice and eyes that pierced like pins, and Caspian in the background, motionless as a granite statue, his felt hat pulled down over his eyebrows and his face a mask of stone eroded by rivers of doubt. Draven kissed her not tenderly, but voraciously, his lips crushing hers as if he wanted to fuse them into a single being, his hands enveloping her in an embrace that was more cage than caress, and Eowyn felt dizzy, an abyss opening beneath her feet, but she mistook it for the ecstasy of love. The ring, a cheap silver band with an opaque turquoise that looked like the eye of a dead man, clamped onto her finger like a poisoned promise. The first few months were a delirium clouded only by the omens of winter lurking like a predator. They moved into a small rented house on the outskirts of Jericho, an architectural corpse with a rusty tin roof that rattled like storm bullets in the snow, thin plank walls that transmitted every sigh of the wind and every creak of the forest, like the wails of adjacent ghosts, and a porch that leaned toward the Lamoille as if it longed to drown. Draven got a job at the McCreary sawmill, a hellish mill in the hills, where circular saws howled like banshees, and sawdust floated in the air like polluted snow, impregnating the skin with the smell of vegetable death. At night, he would return exhausted but ardent, and make her laugh with anecdotes of his wild youth, how he had stolen a rowboat on the bayou to woo a Zydeco dancer, only to be chased by an alligator under the blood moon, fights in jazz clubs where an uppercut had crowned him king of fists, leaving 3 men with broken jaws and teeth scattered like cursed pearls. He gave her second-hand dresses from the St. Albans apothecary, tattered fabrics that smelled of mothballs in previous bodies, and he would drag her to dance at the Black Raven Saloon, an underground dive where sour beer flowed like bile. The band strummed country music with accordions that moaned like strangled throats, and the shadows in the corners seemed to move with intentions of their own. But the idol was a fragile illusion, a thin veil over a pit of snakes. Draven's southern fire, which warmed at first, soon licked at the edges with voracious tongues. It began with poisonous whispers, a cutting comment when Eowyn let the venison stew cool. Are you so useless you can't even watch a pot, woman?" spat with a smile that didn't reach those icy eyes, leaving a bitter aftertaste like gall. Then the hands, a grip too tight on her wrist during a quarrel over scarce money. "Spend less on your girlish whims," he roared, his fingers digging into tender flesh until bruises bloomed like purple lilies on the pale snow of her skin. Eowyn hid them under long sleeves of itchy wool, convincing herself that it was the weight of exile, the clash of climates and temperaments, that Draven adored her in his southern roughness. Caspian sensed it at Sunday dinners at the Hale cabin, where the aroma of cornbread mingled with the stench of tension. Eowyn sitting stiffly cat-like, averting her gaze, a subtle bruise on her forearm that she attributed to tripping in the kitchen. "That son of a bitch is branding you like cattle, Eowyn." Caspian hissed at her at the sink, as soapy water ran red down the drain like diluted blood. "Come home before he breaks your spirit." She shook her head, her lips trembling like leaves in a gale. He's my husband, Dad. Love hurts sometimes, like the thorns on a hawthorn bush. It will pass. The winter of 1988 descended like a frozen shroud, an endless blanket of snow that isolated Jericho in a deathly silence, broken only by the crackling of branches under the white weight and the distant howling of wolves that the old folks swore were the spirits of dead miners. The sawmill closed for weeks, leaving Draven idle and famished, his rage fermenting like sour wine in oak barrels. He began to drink heavily. Bootleg Canadian whiskey, unlabeled bottles he bought from a dealer named Silas Crow, a hunchback dwarf with weasel eyes and a laugh that scraped like nails on a chalkboard. Liquor that left him with breath as foul as a sewer and eyes red as embers in ashes. Arguments erupted like cracks in the ice on the Lamoille, sparks in the dim light of the little house where the oil lamp cast shadows that writhed like souls in agony. "You're a burden, a red leech sucking the life out of me," he would bellow, throwing a jug against the wall, shattering it into fragments that cut Elowen's bare feet like glass from purgatory. She curled up in the corner, whispering pleas like profane prayers, because at the core of her terror still beat the echo of the man who had bewitched her with thorny flowers. The first real beating came in February, on a blizzard night when the wind howled like the banshees of Isolde's legends, those Scottish spirits who howl of impending death, with hair of seaweed and eyes of storm. Draven returned at dusk, staggering like a shipwreck survivor covered in snow that melted into dirty rivulets on the plank floor, smelling of stale sawdust and liquor that burned his nostrils. He found dinner cold, Elowen, prostrate with a fever that had whipped her like a lash, sweating under threadbare blankets as she raved childhood names. "Isolde, Pa, the forest calls. Do you think I can bring bread to this pigsty if you don't even heat the soup, you lazy bitch?" he roared, his voice a thunderclap that rattled the fogged windows. His fist flew through the air like a battering ram, connecting with her cheek in a burst of stars and blinding pain, an impact that sent her crashing to the floor, where the metallic taste of blood flooded her mouth like a dark baptism. She fell to her knees, the world spinning in nauseating spirals, and he paused for a moment, panting like an animal in heat, his knuckles reddened, and a glint of surprise in those blue eyes. Surprise that twisted into disgust. Then anger resurrected, a knee to her side that knocked the breath from her, leaving a bruise that would spread like ink in water. Elowen didn't scream. She bit her lower lip until blood spurted like sap from a bark wound, thinking of the Lamoille, how its cold waters could swallow the pain like a voracious lover. Draven collapsed beside her afterward, sobbing with pathetic ugliness, his hot tears falling on the swelling of her face like acid. "I'm sorry, my Red Queen," he mumbled, kissing the wound with trembling lips, his breath a miasma of whiskey and self-loathing. "It's the Bayou devil in me, the one my old man whipped into me. I swear by the Virgin of New Orleans it won't happen again. You are my salvation, Elowen." And she believed him, because love is a blind veil woven by spiders, and in Jericho, women learn to swallow poison with a smile, sewing their lacerations in the silence of the night, while the wind whispers, "Fool, fool," in the chimneys. But the cycle was an inexorable vortex, like the hidden currents of the Lamoille that drag the unwary into gorges of sharp rocks. March brought a treacherous thaw, streams of muddy water snaking through the muddy streets like open veins, and with them, Draven's fury swelled like a floating corpse, putrid and buoyant. He lashed out over trivialities that concealed abysses, over a poorly starched shirt, the steam from the iron burning his fingers like cruel irony, over a fleeting glance that he swore was flirtatious toward the grocer, Thaddeus Quillen, whose wink was only senile kindness, over the mere act of her breathing in his space, as if her very presence were a profane intrusion. The bruises multiplied in a macabre garden, purple bracelets on her arms that she covered with woolen gloves, maps of bruises on her ribs that made her gasp for breath, hidden under loose blouses that smelled of sweat and fear. A bruise on her thigh that bloomed like a black rose, a reminder of a knee to the stomach in a fight over rent money. Elowen now walked with one shoulder hunched, like a branch twisted by storms, avoiding the fogged mirrors in the little house that reflected back a swollen face, eyes sunk into shadows like coal pits, and cracked lips that bled when she forced smiles. Caspian confronted her during visits that became rituals of interrogation. "Daughter, that bastard is a cancer in your blood. Leave him before he devours your womb." His gray eyes glowed with an anger that bordered on prophecy, but she denied it, weaving excuses like cobwebs. "It's winter, Dad. The cold drives him crazy. I love him, and love is a thorn that bleeds but blooms." Secretly, however, Isolde's visions returned. Dreams where her mother, spectral in a soaked white dress, warned her from the Lamoille. "The southern serpent will poison you, child. Cut off its head before it swallows you." The spring of 1989 was a mirage of false redemption, a respite in hell where the devil sharpens his horns. Draven, racked with guilt that gnawed at him like termites in rotten wood, promised transformation. He knelt in the chapel with Sister Miriam, whose holy water smelled of iron and rust, swearing abstinence and devotion before a twisted brass crucifix. For 3 agonizing weeks, he was the heartthrob again, tender as a puppy, attentive as a priest, his large hands now tracing ethereal caresses instead of destructive fists, whispering, "You are my light in this Yankee purgatory," as he rocked her in the broken rocking chair. Elowen, thirsty for normality, dared to dream of a child, an heir who would heal the cracks in her marriage, a blue-eyed boy who would redeem his father. But cycles of violence are as predictable as the phases of the moon in Vermont. Fleeting warmth gives way to eternal cold, and in May, during the common meadow fair, a sordid carnival with stalls selling fermented cider that got the children drunk, maple cakes sticky as sugary blood, and tattered flags waving like shrouds in the breeze. The veil was torn again. Draven saw her chatting with Harlan Voss, an elderly lumberjack with a moss-white beard and trembling hands who gave her a red apple for helping him straighten his axe stand. The fruit was juicy, a bite that dripped juice like blood from a fresh wound. But in Draven's eyes, it was a mortal affront, blatant flirtation, betrayal in the public meadow. That night, he dragged her back to the cottage by her arm, his nails digging into her flesh, leaving bloody grooves in the soft earth of the path, twilight staining the sky purple like a cosmic bruise. He slammed her against the splintered oak door, the impact echoing like a gunshot in the stillness, his face contorted into a mask of insane jealousy. "You think you can strut around with old men in front of me, you Scottish whore? I'll fuck you until you forget their names," he spat, his breath a gale of sour beer and distilled hatred. The first blow was to her stomach, a sinking punch that bent her like a reed in a storm, expelling the air from her lungs in a muffled groan. The second, a backhand to her temple that set off fireworks in her vision, nausea churning her guts like snakes in a basket. For the first time, Elowen fought back. Her nails, broken from working in the shop, scratched Draven's cheek, leaving 3 red gashes that bled like tears of rage. That unleashed the apocalypse. He roared like a swollen bayou straddling her on the hard-packed earth, his knees digging into her fractured ribs like stakes into a vampire's heart, and pounding her with biblical fury. Fist after fist, a rhythmic hammering of flesh against flesh. On the jaw, splintering bone with a snap that echoed like a broken branch. On the left eye, swelling it shut into a purple slit that throbbed like a second heart. On the breasts, bruising the tender flesh until the pain radiated like liquid fire. On the abdomen, reopening invisible wounds with blows that made her vomit bile mixed with blood. "I'll kill you if you let me. I'll cut you open like a deer and hang you from the trees for the crows to peck at," he howled. his voice broken by hysterical sobs, tears of sweat and rage falling on his shattered face like drops of acid. Blood splattered the ground in an abstract mosaic, bright red against the dark earth, and the air thickened with the metallic stench of blood mixed with rancid sweat and foul breath. Elowen did not scream. Her throat closed like a trap, and her mind escaped, floating to the forests of her childhood, where fireflies were now the eyes of vengeful ancestors judging her for her weakness. When Draven's fury was spent, like a hurricane leaving ruins in its wake, he left her curled up in a bloody heap in the corner, breathing in shallow gasps that whistled like wind through cracks in a tomb, and staggered out into the night, toward the Black Raven Saloon, to drown his regret in glasses of whiskey that burned like broken promises. Caspian arrived at dawn, alerted by the widow Agnes Finch, a gossipy neighbor with ears like satyr horns, who had heard the blows through walls as thin as drumskins. He found her on the floor, a tapestry of bruises and cuts, her face a map of purple swellings and burst lips that bubbled foamy blood, her body a canvas of pain with splintered ribs and an internal flow that made her pale as wax. "My child, my only light," Caspian murmured, his voice a muffled thunder, lifting her with arms that trembled not from weakness, but from a primal rage that made his bones creak. He wrapped her in a threadbare blanket that smelled of wood smoke and carried her to his hay cart, the wheels squeaking on the mud like whales, and took her to Hale's cabin, where the forest seemed to close like jaws around the road. He called Dr. Ephraim Quillen, redeemed but haunted by the ghost of Isolde's delivery, who arrived in his beat-up Ford, carrying a cracked leather bag that reeked of phenol and remorse. Multiple fractures in her ribs and jaw, severe concussion, internal bleeding. "And my God, she's pregnant," diagnosed the old man, his trembling hands sewing up wounds with thick thread that pricked like witches' needles, sweat beading on his bald forehead. Elowen was delirious with fever, her voice a feverish whisper. "Draven, the baby. The shadows are coming. Pa, cut them off." The baby. Caspian froze, his face gray as a tombstone. 3 months pregnant, a secret she had kept like a crystal fetus in her womb. A miracle amid the chaos. But the body is a cruel traitor, Thorn. The beating had been an internal earthquake. That afternoon, as Caspian watched over the bed with his hands clasped on the family Bible, an 1842 volume with yellowed pages and annotations in Gaelic cursing the abusers, Elowen convulsed in a spectral birth. The child, you, in potential an innocent soul trapped in the womb of violence, slid out in a stream of dark blood and clots, an induced abortion that stained the sheets like a pagan offering. Caspian buried him in the backyard that night, under the hawthorn that gives your name Thorn, a prickly bush with dagger-like thorns, whose roots now drink from that loss, murmuring a Scottish requiem that the wind carried to the Lamoille. Elowen awoke the next day, her soul shattered, her womb an emptiness that hurt more than the fractures, and she swore over the makeshift grave, "No more, Dad. I'll report him. Let the law chain him up like the dog he is." The night of the slaughter was June 14th, 1989, a Thursday with a full moon that bathed Jericho in a silvery unholy glow, as if Selene herself were spilling mercury over the cursed land. The air vibrated with ozone, harbingers of a storm that never came, and the crickets sang a dirge in the tall grass, a funeral chorus that seemed to invoke the lows of Louisiana. Elowen, against Caspian's pleas, "Stay, daughter, let the river carry it away," returned to the cottage that afternoon to claim her belongings. A wicker trunk with threadbare dresses that smelled of wilted lavender and dried tears. The wedding photo torn at the corner, where Draven's face smiled like a demon. Isolde's locket, with a strand of red hair braided like a talisman against evil. Draven was waiting for her, sober by miracle or cunning, slumped in the rickety rocking chair with a warm beer sweating in his hand, his silhouette outlined against the window where the moon reflected like an accusing eye. "Don't go, my queen of thorns," he pleaded, his voice a drawn-out lament that concealed fangs, his blue eyes shining with a possessive gleam that bordered on madness. "I need you, like the bayou needs the fog. I'll do as you ask. I'll go to confession. I'll work double shifts. I'll forge you a throne of bones if necessary." Alawen hesitated on the threshold, her heart a knot of rotten pity and ancient terror, and agreed to talk. Just talk, under the dim light of the oil lamp that flickered like a candle at a wake. They sat at the splintered pine table, words flowing like oil on water, his promises, her doubts, a fragile bridge over the abyss. But the serpent's tongues twisted in the darkness. Draven suddenly stood up, blocking the door with his imposing mass, and the southern demon was resurrected in his breath, a stench of stale beer that Elowen had not noticed before. "You think you can walk away with my seed inside you? That bastard was mine, and so are you," he roared, though the abortion was a secret he sensed, like a bloodhound sniffing blood. He pushed her against the kitchen table, the oak edge digging into her bruised hip like a blunt dagger, and his fist flew again, a hook to her shoulder that spun her like a whirling leaf, an uppercut to her chin that lifted her off the floor and slammed her against the plank wall, where the wood creaked like vertebrae snapping. Elowen's world blurred into a whirlpool of agony, a throbbing pain in her head that made her nose bleed in warm rivulets, and she fell to her knees, vomiting a cocktail of bile and clotted blood that splattered the floor like an offering to forgotten deities. Draven loomed over her, laughing a hollow, demented laugh that echoed through the little house like the echo of an insane asylum. "Look at you, broken like a rag doll, bleeding like the whore you are. No one will want you now, not even your old crow of a father." He lifted her by her hair, tangling his fingers in the red strands as if they were the reins of a wild steed, and dragged her to the dripping sink, where the water fell in a hypnotic tick-tock like an hourglass at an execution. "I'll show you the price of disloyalty, Yankee witch," he hissed, and his fist descended in a symphony of brutality. On her jaw, breaking more teeth into fragments that cut her tongue like glass. On her already swollen eye, closing it completely into a throbbing mass of purple flesh. In the abdomen, punches sunk deep that rekindled the emptiness of the abortion, causing old blood to flow again in a treacherous stream between her thighs. Alawen surrendered to the pain, her body a limp sack of bones and lacerated flesh, her mind drifting away to the Lamoille, imagining its black waters enveloping her like a liquid shroud, drowning the torment in merciful oblivion. At that climax of horror, the blackthorn forest seemed to hold its breath, the pines whispering ancient incantations as Caspian lurked in the shadows, his silhouette merging with the trunks like a vengeful dryad. He had followed Elowen that afternoon with the carpenter's axe, not the wood-cutting kind, but a small one with a polished ash handle, sharpened like a scythe for fine details in wood, strapped to his belt under his canvas jacket, not with murderous intent, he later swore in tormented whispers, but as a talisman against human beasts. When the blows pierced the night like distant thunder, Caspian's world turned crimson, a red mist clouding his vision and stoking an ancient fire in his Scottish veins. He ran toward the cottage, his heart pounding like a Celtic war drum, bursting through the back door that hung on hinges as loose as torn flesh. The scene assaulted him like a specter. His daughter, a bloody mess on the kitchen floor, breathing in wet gasps that bubbled blood from broken lips, life escaping from the corners of her mouth and nostrils in rivulets that formed reflective pools under the moon. Draven turned, slow as a sated predator, his knuckles dripping viscous blood that dripped onto the floor like tears of murder, and a crooked smile on his bearded face, red-stained teeth gleaming like fangs. "What the hell are you doing here, old goat? Come to join the family party," he spat, advancing with drunken steps, his chest heaving beneath his torn shirt. Caspian did not respond. Words were for cowards and the living. His gray eyes hardened like steel forged in volcanic hells, and he lunged with his bare hands first, a whirlwind of claws that grabbed Draven's shirt and threw him against the cast-iron stove, the metal resonating like a sepulchral gong that vibrated in the bones of the little house. Draven counterattacked with animal ferocity, his fist connecting with Caspian's ear in a crack of cartilage that spilled warm blood down the old man's neck. But Caspian was an ancient oak, roots deep in the soil of loss. They rolled across the floor in primal chaos, guttural growls like beasts in the sand, curses in Gaelic and Southern colliding like swords, knocking over chairs that splintered like broken limbs, plates that shattered into mosaics of sharp porcelain that cut skin and tendons. Draven, younger and stockier, gained the upper hand for a moment, mounting Caspian and landing blows to his face. Fists that carved furrows in his cheek, splintering cheekbones and causing blood to spurt like sap from a wounded tree. But in a gasping breath, Caspian struggled, his knees sinking into his son-in-law's soft belly, and they rolled again, knocking over the table, which crashed to the floor with a crash. Draven was the first to stagger to his feet and rush to the kitchen drawer where his hunting knife lay, a 6-inch serrated blade, forged from stolen Toledo steel, stained with the dried blood of skinned deer and now ready for human flesh. Caspian saw it as if in a prophetic dream, time stretching out in viscous threads. His daughter lay there, a premature corpse with her chest rising in weak spasms. And in his mind flashed the memory of Isolde's delivery, the uncontrollable blood that carried his wife away like an underground river. No more, Caspian thought, a mantra that echoed in his skull like a shamanic drum, and when Draven turned with the knife raised in a lethal arc, the blade catching the moon in a silvery glint like the Grim Reaper's scythe, Caspian tackled him like an enraged grizzly bear, their bodies colliding with an impact that shook the rafters. They fell into a tangle of limbs, the knife flying from Draven's hand and embedding itself vibratingly in the plank wall, buzzing like a wounded viper. Caspian mounted his son-in-law, knees dug into his broad chest that gasped like broken bellows and fumbled for the cane in his boot. There, hidden like a family secret, his father's pocket knife, a damascened steel artifact, a 3-inch blade sharpened for generations on wood and occasionally flesh, engraved with Celtic runes that invoked protection against evil, but now cried out for vengeance. Draven struggled with the strength of a condemned man, his nails scratching Caspian's face, leaving deep gashes that bled hot rivers down the gray beard. But the old man was relentless, a golem of paternal rage. For my daughter, for Isolde, for the blood you will stain no more, Caspian growled, his voice a guttural thunder that seemed to summon a spectral wind into the little house. The blade descended in a precise surgical arc, cutting Draven's throat from ear to ear in a clean slash that opened his jugular like a burst river. Blood spurted in a hot arterial jet, a crimson geyser that splattered the ceiling in red constellations, the walls in abstract murals of death, and Caspian's face in a ritual mask of war. Draven gurgled, a wet choking sound like a dying fish on dry land, his blue eyes opening wide in an O of utter surprise and betrayal, his pupils dilating like black wells absorbing the last of the light. His hands flew to his neck in an instinctive gesture, fingers slipping into the open flesh, trying to plug the unrelenting spring, while his legs kicked in a macabre dance, pounding the floor in an erratic rhythm that splattered blood in arcs. The pool spread beneath him, thick and sticky like hellish molasses, impregnating the air with the metallic sweet stench of massive hemorrhage, a scent that would cling to Caspian's nostrils for eternal nights. The body convulsed in diminishing spasms, muscles tensing like cables, bladder emptying in a shameful stream that mixed urine with blood, a final breath whistling through the severed windpipe like wind through a broken flute. Finally, stillness, glassy eyes fixed on the stained ceiling, mouth open in a silent scream, face frozen in a grimace of disbelief that seemed to whisper, "Why?" Caspian stepped back, gasping, the blade dripping in his trembling hand, and for a moment the silence was absolute, broken only by the dripping of the sink and Eloin's death rattles. She saw it all in an agonizing blur from the floor. Her father's face, splattered red like a druid warrior in battle. Her husband's blood flowing like sacrilegious wine from a broken cup. The silence that followed, heavy as a tombstone, where the shadows on the walls seemed to lengthen, taking the shapes of Isolde and ancestors, nodding in spectral approval. She tried to speak. "Pa. Stop." But her throat closed in a spasm and the world dissolved into a black vortex of shock and blood loss. He fell into a coma that night, his pulse a fragile thread that the doctors in Burlington, at St. Mary's Hospital, a bastion of cold fluorescent lights and the smell of disinfectant that masked death, struggled to preserve during 3 weeks of hellish vigil. The police burst in at dawn, alerted by Agnes Finch, whose gossipy tongue had summoned Sheriff Blackwood and his deputies. Men in threadbare uniforms that smelled of stale coffee and donuts. They cordoned off the little house with yellow tape that fluttered like snakes, where flies were already buzzing in greedy swarms over Draven's corpse, their larvae destined to gestate in the cooling flesh. Caspian surrendered without resistance at the Jericho police station, a damp brick bunker with cells that dripped like infected wounds, sitting with his hands cuffed, still shaking from adrenaline, his shirt stiff with dried blood that crackled like parchment. "Self-defense, Sheriff," he declared, in a voice as gravelly as gravel, his eyes fixed on a point beyond the bars. "That southern animal was disemboweling my daughter before my eyes. The law of God and the law of men absolve me." The trial was a sordid coven in the St. Albans courthouse in July 1989, under a sticky heat that made those present sweat like sinners in hell, the air thick with sweat, cheap cologne, and the rancid stench of rural justice. Eloin emerged from her coma emaciated like a specter, her skin waxy and fresh scars on her face like runes of survival, testifying from a wheelchair that creaked like a ghost carriage. Her voice was a trembling thread, broken by pauses where trauma strangled her. "He was going to slit my throat, Sheriff. I saw it in his eyes, the same blue as a cold knife. My fa saved me from the abyss." The bruises spoke more eloquently. Grainy photographs showed her face like a canvas by a mad Van Gogh, and the coroner, Dr. Josiah Wren of Burlington, confirmed the fractures, the internal bleeding, the barbaric forced abortion, with a report detailing each broken bone like verses of a requiem. Draven had a history that unfolded like a shroud, an assault charge in Shreveport, Louisiana, where he had left a waitress with a broken nose and a broken spirit, a sealed record for breaking into a brothel in Mobile, where he had stabbed a rival in a jealous rage, rumors of debts to loan sharks who pursued him like bloodhounds. Jericho's neighbors whispered in the courtroom hallways, drunken binges at the sawmill where he abused the guard dogs until they howled, lewd glances at other men's wives in the saloon. Caspian was sentenced to 6 months for second-degree manslaughter, but got out in 3, good behavior, carving crucifixes and wooden spoons for inmates at the St. Albans State Prison, a damp hole where rats scurried like lesser demons, and the nights were filled with the moans of broken souls. A compassionate judge, named Judge Harlan Voss, an old codger from Montpelier with warts on his hands like witches' moles, and a voice that thundered like biblical thunder, and the verdict of self-defense that weighed like a papal absolution. Vermont law protects guardians of the home, Voss ruled, banging his gavel with a snap that echoed like a gunshot. In prison, Caspian dreamed of blood, arterial spurts drowning him on his cot, Draven's gurgling turning into mocking laughter, shadows of Isolde accusing him of summoning evil when he wielded the blade. He was released in October, thin as a specter, bent over by the invisible weight of guilt, with a scar on his cheek where Draven had scratched him. A white line that snaked like a ghost river, which he scratched at during sleepless nights. He took me in his arms for the first time that night on our return, Thorn, under a starry sky that twinkled like the eyes of silent witnesses and murmured against my wrinkled forehead, "This child will not know the claws of beasts like you, Elowen. I swear by the blood on my hands." But the secret festered in us like an ulcer. Elowen never laughed freely again, her voice a perpetual whisper stolen by the wind. Caspian drank rum distilled in homemade stills in the shadows of the porch, drinking himself drunk until he saw Draven in the reflections of the lamoille. And I grew up Thorn, hearing echoes in the cabin, ghostly knocks on the walls, whispers of daddy, blood. In the wind, visions of a tall man with blue eyes lurking in the blackthorn. Your mother confessed everything to me when I turned 18, Thorn. The night before she fled to Burlington, where the city lights drown the ghosts but don't kill them. "It's not pride, son. It's a curse woven into our flesh," she said, blowing out the lamp with a breath that smelled of wax and tears, leaving the porch in darkness, where the shadows closed like jaws. Since then, I walk alert to the abyss. In every embrace beats a hidden blade. In every family secret, a stain of blood that seeps into dreams, eternal as the lamoille that licks its shores with cold tongues. And so, this story that is not entirely mine, told by Elowen, lived by Caspian, stained by Draven, becomes entangled in you, Thorn, like black roots in the soil of Jericho. Shadows do not die. They whisper. They wait. And on nights when the moon is full, the pocket knife still glitters in grandfather's drawer, calling for the next blood. There are certain truths that once discovered rewrite every memory you thought you had. Every smile becomes a mask. Every I love you becomes a possible lie. Every moment of your childhood becomes an unanswered question. Did you know? Should you have known? Were you complicit in your ignorance? My name is Elodie Harrow. I am 31 years old, and until 6 months ago, I thought I knew my family. Now I know I knew nothing. And the weight of that knowledge, of what I found in the basement of the house where I grew up, is something I will carry with me until my last day. The house was in Montpelier, Vermont, a colonial structure from 1890 with 3 stories, high ceilings, and that particular kind of worn elegance that makes outsiders say, "How charming," without understanding how many secrets an old house can hide. My parents, Orson and Celestine Harrow, had lived there for 37 years. I had grown up there, in that house with its creaky wooden floors and walls that groaned with every gust of wind. My father died in January, a sudden heart attack at 68. My mother followed him just 6 weeks later. The doctors said it was a stroke, but I knew the truth. It was a broken heart. They had been together since they were teenagers. One couldn't exist without the other. Or so I thought. As an only child, the task of emptying the house fell entirely to me. My wife, Nephilis, had accompanied me for the first few days, but her job called her back to Boston. So I was left alone in that huge house, surrounded by ghosts from my childhood and decades of family accumulation. I decided to start with a complete renovation. The house was outdated, and if I was going to sell it, I needed to modernize it. I hired a local contractor, a taciturn man named Roscoe, who had the air of someone who had seen too much but spoke too little. "The basement," he said on his 3rd visit, waving his flashlight through the dark, damp space. "There's something odd about the dimensions." We were standing in the unfinished basement of the house. Original stone walls, compacted dirt floor, low ceiling with exposed wooden beams. I had always hated the basement as a child. It had that particular quality of darkness that seemed denser than the absence of normal light. My parents had told me to stay away from there. "It's dangerous," my father would say. "There could be rats. There could be toxic mold." So I stayed away. Throughout my childhood, the basement was off limits. "What do you mean, weird?" I asked Roscoe. He tapped the east wall of the basement with his knuckles. The sound was solid, heavy. Then he tapped the north wall. Same sound. But when he tapped the south wall, the sound changed. More hollow, thinner. "This isn't original stone," he said, running his hand over the surface. "It's brick. Newer. Maybe from the 50s or 60s, judging by the type of mortar. And the dimensions don't add up. I measured the basement from the inside, 28 feet north to south. But I measured the house from the outside, 34 feet. 6 feet are missing. A lost space. A hidden room." My first thought was curious, not alarmed. Old houses had weird spaces. Maybe they had sealed off a section because the foundation was compromised. Maybe it was just an access space that was no longer used. "We should open it up," I said. "See what's in there. It could be a structural problem." Roscoe looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Are you sure? Sometimes things are sealed for a reason." "I need to know what's in my house before I sell it," I said firmly. "Open it up." He nodded slowly and went to get his tools. It took him 3 hours to break through enough brick and mortar to create an opening large enough to enter. The work was slow, methodical, and with each brick he removed, the air in the basement seemed to grow denser, colder. When the opening was finally large enough, Roscoe stopped and stepped aside. "After you," he said, but there was something strange in his tone. Not inviting. More like a warning. I crouched down and squeezed through the hole in the wall, my flashlight lighting the way. The space on the other side was small, maybe 6 feet by 8 feet, with a low ceiling. The walls were made of the original stone from the foundation. The floor was still compacted earth. And against the back wall there were wooden shelves filled with things. I approached slowly, my heart beating faster for no apparent reason. The first shelf contained old shoeboxes. I opened them with trembling hands. Inside the first box was a woman's wallet. Brown leather, worn but well preserved. I opened it. There was a driver's license inside, laminated in that old-fashioned style from the 80s. The photo showed a young woman with curly hair and a bright smile. The name read, Fawn Millicent Russo. Date of birth, 1968. I didn't recognize the name. I closed that box and opened another, a man's watch, heavy, gold-plated, with an inscription on the back, "To Idris, with love, from your family. Graduation 1972. Another box, glasses, thick lenses in a tortoiseshell frame, the kind that hadn't been worn since the 1970s. Another, a medical ID bracelet, Acadia Moss, type 1 diabetic. Each box contained personal items, IDs, jewelry, watches, wallets, things people wouldn't willingly leave behind, things they would carry with them until someone took them away. And there were so many boxes, 12, 15, 20. My legs nearly gave way. I grabbed the edge of the shelf to keep myself upright. The cold metal against my palm was the only point of reality in a world that was crumbling around me. "Ms. Harrow?" Roscoe's voice came from the other side of the wall. "Everything okay in there?" I couldn't answer. I couldn't form words, because I understood what I was looking at. A collection, trophies, mementos of people who had disappeared, and they were in the basement of my parents' house. I finally managed to speak. "Call the police." There was silence. Then, "What?" "Call the police, now." I didn't wait for his response. I continued exploring the room with a horrible fascination. I needed to know. I needed to understand the magnitude of what I had found. There were more shelves, more boxes, and in the far corner something different. A spiral-bound notebook. Old. The pages yellowed, the cover stained with what I desperately hoped was just water. I opened it with hands that were shaking so badly I could barely hold it. The first page had a date written in faded blue ink. August 15th, 1971. Below, in careful handwriting that I recognized with growing horror, was written, Subject 1, Idris Keaton, male, 23 years old. Location, Route 2 near Plainfield. Method, strangulation. Duration 7 minutes. Observations, minimal resistance. Disposition, Green Mountain National Forest, northern sector. Items retained, watch, wallet. The handwriting was my father's. The next page. Subject 2, Acadia Moss, female, 31 years old. And the next, and the next. Entry after entry. 27 in total, spread over 3 decades. The last one dated 1998, the year I turned 8. Each entry meticulously detailed. Name, age, where he had found them, how he had killed them, where he had hidden the bodies, and what personal items he had kept as souvenirs. My father had been a serial killer, and this sealed room was his secret sanctuary. I staggered out of the room, barely making it through the hole in the wall before vomiting on the basement floor. Roscoe was on the phone, his voice tense as he described the situation to the dispatcher. The police arrived 20 minutes later. First 2 uniformed officers, then detectives, then forensic technicians, then what appeared to be the entire Montpelier Police Department and Vermont State Troopers. They sat me in the kitchen while they processed the scene. A detective, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes named Giselle Vance, sat down across from me. "Ms. Harrow," she began softly, "I need you to tell me everything you know about this room." "Nothing," I whispered. I didn't know it existed. I'd never been in that part of the basement. My parents always told me to stay away from the basement, that it was dangerous. She nodded, taking notes. "When did your parents die?" "My father in January, my mother in February." "And they never mentioned anything about this room, about these objects?" "Never." But as I said the word, memories began to surface. Little things I hadn't thought about in years. The time when I was 7 and went downstairs in the middle of the night looking for a glass of water. I saw my father coming up from the basement, his clothes dirty, his hands stained with something dark that he said was motor oil. But we didn't have a car in the basement. Why would he have been working on a car down there? Or the time when I was 10 and found a woman's bracelet in my father's coat pocket. I showed it to my mother. She took it quickly, with an expression on her face that I didn't understand then, but now recognize as fear. "It's mine," she said. "I must have dropped it there." But I never saw her wear it after that. Or the night trips my father took for work, even though he was an accountant and his office closed at 5. Or the way my parents would tense up every time the news mentioned another missing person in Vermont or New Hampshire. Clues. They had been there my whole life, but I was a child who loved her parents, a child who couldn't conceive that the people who read her bedtime stories and took her to ballet lessons could be monsters. "My mother," I said suddenly, looking at Detective Vance. "Did she know? Was she involved?" The detective hesitated. "That's what we have to determine. But Ms. Harrow, in my experience, it's very difficult to hide something of this magnitude from a spouse, especially for decades." The world spun around me. My mother, my sweet, quiet, perfectly proper mother who baked cookies for school sales and organized winter clothing drives for people in need. Did she know her husband was killing people? Did she know there was a room full of trophies right below where she served family dinner every night? The days that followed were a nightmare. The media found out. The house was cordoned off. Forensic teams dug up the yard, looking for... I don't want to think about what they were looking for. I moved into a hotel, unable to stay in that house another minute, but I couldn't escape the questions. From the detectives, from the reporters, from my own mind. Detective Vance kept me informed as the investigation progressed. The names in my father's notebook matched people who had gone missing across New England between 1971 and 1998. Cold cases, families who had been waiting for answers for decades. They found some of the bodies in the locations my father had meticulously documented. Others had been lost to time, to changes in the landscape, to natural decay. But the worst was yet to come. We found more notebooks, Detective Vance told me a week after the initial discovery. We met in an interrogation room at the police station. hidden in a safe deposit box your father had at a local bank. She showed me one. This one was newer, the pages less yellowed, and the handwriting was different, more delicate, more feminine, my mother's handwriting. It seems your father started out alone, Vance explained softly. But sometime in the late 70s, your mother discovered what he was doing, and instead of reporting it, she paused, searching for the right words. She joined him, I finished, my voice hollow. She nodded. The last 7 victims, they were both involved. His mother documented her own participation. I read the entries with eyes that didn't feel like my own. My mother wrote as if she were documenting a scientific experiment. No emotion, no remorse, just clinical observations about how she had helped my father lure victims, how she had helped restrain them, how she had helped dispose of the evidence. And then came the question I had been avoiding since the moment I found that room. The question Detective Vance finally asked out loud. Ms. Harrow, I need to ask you, did you ever suspect? Did you ever see anything that should have told you something was wrong? I had seen things, small things, strange things, but I had explained them away. I had rationalized them. Because they were my parents. Because I loved them. Because the alternative was unthinkable. Once upon a time, I said slowly, the memories coming in painful fragments. I was maybe 9 years old. It was 1999, a year after my father stopped doing what he did. I paused, breathing deeply. There was a woman. I came home from school, and there was a woman in our house. My mother said she was a family friend visiting from out of state, but something about the way she was. The woman looked scared. She was trying to smile, but her eyes kept looking toward the door, as if she were looking for a way to escape. Do you remember her name? No. But I remember that night, I heard my parents whispering, angry voices. My father was saying, it's too risky now. Elodie is growing up, she's becoming more aware. And my mother was saying, just one more. We just need one more. And the woman? She left the next morning, or so I was told. They said she had taken a bus back home. I never saw her again. Detective Vance made more notes. Do you remember what she looked like? I did. Reddish blonde hair, freckles, nervous smile, and on her wrist, a blue beaded bracelet. 2 days later, Vance called me. They had identified the woman from one of the last entries in my mother's notebook. Her name was Fawn Russo, the same woman whose driver's license I had found in the first box I opened. She had been in my house. She had smiled at me. She had eaten dinner at our table, and my parents had killed her. The last victim had been killed while I slept upstairs, while I dreamed whatever 9-year-olds dream, while I existed in a bubble of innocence that my parents carefully kept intact. Why did they stop after Fawn? My father's notes made it clear. Elodie is too old now, too perceptive. We can't risk it. This must end. They had stopped killing me, not out of remorse, not out of a regained conscience, but because I, their innocent daughter, was becoming a security risk. That was what my life was worth to them. Not love, not protective instinct, just risk calculation. The investigation revealed more, much more than I ever wanted to know. My father came from a family where violence was normal. His own father had been abusive, though he had never been arrested. Neighbors whispered but never reported it. My father had channeled that violence in a way he thought he could control, that he could contain. My mother came from a deeply religious family that valued obedience and loyalty above all else. When she discovered what my father was doing, her first instinct was not horror or the law, but to protect her husband, to protect her family, to keep up appearances at any cost. And the cost had been 27 lives. The victims' families began to contact me. Some were looking for answers. Some were looking for closure. Some were just looking for someone to blame. I understood them. I needed someone to blame too. But the person I kept thinking about was myself. I should have known. Shouldn't I have known? There were signs, strange behavior, inconsistencies. But I was a child, and children trust their parents. Children don't go around assuming their parents are monsters, but another part of me whispered, "You were an accomplice. Your existence allowed them to appear normal. Your smile in family photos was proof that there was nothing wrong in that house. You were their perfect cover." My therapist, whom I started seeing after the first 2 weeks of constant nightmares, said it was survivor's guilt, that there was nothing I could have done, that I was a victim too, but I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like, I don't know what, an heir to crimes I didn't commit, a bearer of guilt I didn't earn but can't shake. The public trial was swift and brutal. Even though I hadn't done anything wrong legally, people couldn't separate the daughter from the parents. I lost my job. I lost friends. Nefili stayed with me at first, but the stress of it all was too much. We broke up after 4 months. I legally changed my name, from Elodie Harrow to just Elodie Vale. I cut all ties to my father's surname, but I couldn't cut the ties to my history. The house was finally released by the police 6 months later. It was ruined. No one would want to buy the murderer's house, so I did the only thing that seemed appropriate. I donated it to the victims' families. They formed a foundation. They tore down the house and built a memorial in its place. 27 stones, each with a name. The people my parents had killed, the lives they had stolen. I went to the dedication ceremony. I stood in the back, wearing a hoodie and sunglasses, trying to be invisible. But someone recognized me. A woman in her 50s, her eyes red from crying. "My sister," she said, pointing to one of the stones. "Acadia Moss. She had 3 children. They all grew up without their mother because of your father." "I'm sorry," I whispered. The words were completely inadequate, but they were all I had. "I'm so sorry." She looked at me with an expression that wasn't exactly hatred, but it wasn't forgiveness either. "It wasn't your fault," she said finally. "But I can't say I'm glad to meet you either." She walked away. I stood there in front of those 27 stones, reading the names of people my parents had reduced to objects in boxes. People with families, dreams, lives they should have lived. And I thought of my mother, who had taught me how to bake cookies. My father, who had taught me how to ride a bike. How could they be the same people who did these terrible things? The answer, I finally understood, was that monsters rarely look like monsters. They are good neighbors, loving parents, respected members of the community. They wear masks so convincing that even they believe them. And the people closest to them, the ones who should see through the masks, are often the most blinded. Because recognizing the monster means recognizing your own unwitting complicity in maintaining the facade. I now live in the Pacific Northwest under my new name. I work remotely as an accountant, ironically the same field as my father. Sometimes I wonder if I inherited more from him than just his profession. Is there darkness in me too? Is it in my genes waiting to awaken? I don't know. And that uncertainty is a burden I carry every day. 2 weeks ago, a young woman knocked on my door. She said she was a criminology student writing a thesis on families of serial killers. She wanted to interview me. "What is it like," she asked, "to live knowing what your parents did?" I looked at her for a long moment. Then I said, "It's living with the knowledge that every happy memory of my childhood is tainted. That every 'I love you' they said to me was spoken by mouths that also planned murders. That the house where I felt safe was built on secrets that destroyed entire families. It's waking up every morning wondering, should I have known? Could I have stopped them? How many lives could have been saved if I had been more observant, more suspicious, less trusting? It's carrying the weight of crimes I didn't commit but can't escape, because the world sees my face and sees my father's face. It sees my name, my old name, and it sees monsters. It's the realization that I can never ever undo what I discovered in that sealed room. That those boxes full of stolen lives, that notebook full of detailed confessions, are part of my story now too. The student took notes quickly. "And the objects?" she asked. "The trophies your father kept. What happened to them?" "They were returned to the families when possible. Some objects, watches, jewelry, photos, were treasures that families had assumed were lost forever. Others," I paused, taking a deep breath, "others were too painful to receive. Physical reminders of what had been taken. And the notebook, the written confessions, evidence, filed away, available to researchers, historians, criminologists. Part of the public record now, as it should be. The secrets caused enough damage. The truth, however painful, is better." The student closed her notebook. "One last question. Have you ever forgiven your parents?" The question hit me like a physical punch. Forgive. It would imply that there was a way back to some kind of normal relationship with her memories, that I could separate the parents I knew from the monsters they were. "No," I said finally. "I cannot forgive the unforgivable, but I have come to a kind of understanding, not of their actions which are incomprehensible, but of my own position in all of this. I was not responsible for their crimes, but I am responsible for how I choose to live with the knowledge of those crimes. And I choose to live with honesty, with openness about what happened, with a commitment to ensuring that those 27 people are not forgotten. Because that's all I can do. I can't bring them back. I can't undo the damage, but I can make sure their stories are told, that their names are remembered as more than just entries in a killer's notebook." The student left after that, and I sat in my small apartment, looking at the only photo I kept from my childhood, a family picnic photo taken when I was 6 years old. I am sitting between my parents, smiling broadly, holding a chocolate ice cream cone. The photo was taken in the summer of 1996. According to my father's notebook, it was 2 weeks after he had killed his 18th victim. That ice cream I'm eating so happily was bought with money from a wallet my father had taken from a corpse. That is the truth I live with. And every night, before I go to sleep, I say the names. The 27 names of the people my parents killed. It is my ritual, my penance, my way of making sure they remain people, not just entries in a notebook or objects in boxes. Idris Keaton, Acadia Moss, Fawn Russo. The names go on, and they will go on every night for the rest of my life, because someone has to remember them, and if not me, then who? I am the daughter of monsters, but I am also the keeper of their victims' memories. That is the guilt I inherited, and that is the burden I will carry until my last breath. There is no redemption in this story. There is no happy ending, only the raw, horrible truth of what happened in the basement of a house in Montpelier, Vermont, and the realization that the darkest family secrets don't always come with warnings. They don't always come with obvious signs. Sometimes they hide behind smiles and homemade cookies and family game nights. Sometimes the monsters are the people who read you bedtime stories. And sometimes the scariest truth isn't that monsters exist. It's that we love them without knowing what they really are, until it's too late. Until you open a sealed door and find a room full of evidence that your entire life was built on a lie. That's my story. That's my truth. And every day, I live with the weight of both. There are certain forms of betrayal that rewrite your entire history. Not just the recent past, but every memory you ever had. Every moment you thought you understood. The certainty that your life was lived becomes an unanswerable question. Did it really happen? Or was it just another scene I was forced to act out? My name is Oberon Castellan. I am 36 years old, and until 4 months ago, I believed I knew my own story. Now I know that my childhood was a carefully orchestrated performance, and the director was my older brother, the brother who just died, the brother whose belongings I inherited, including 73 VHS tapes documenting a truth I wish I had never discovered. My brother Destin Died in March. Suicide, the coroner said. He hanged himself in the attic of his house outside Asheville, North Carolina. He was 42 years old. He left no note. He left no explanation. He just left a house full of cameras, video equipment, and boxes of tapes. As his only living sibling, our parents died years ago in what we were told was a car accident. The task of clearing out his property fell to me. I traveled from my apartment in Chicago, where I work as a high school history teacher, expecting to spend perhaps a week packing up his things, hiring a real estate agent, and closing that chapter of my life. I didn't expect to find evidence that that chapter had never really been closed, that it had been open all along, bleeding into every aspect of my existence without my knowledge. Destin's house was small, a 2-story structure on 5 acres of secluded woods. He had always been solitary, even when we were children. 8 years older than me, he had been more guardian than brother, more father figure than companion. After our parents died when I was 18, he was the one who made sure I finished college, who gave me money when I needed it, who called every Sunday without fail. But we never really talked. Never about anything important. Just superficialities. The weather, work, trivialities. As if there were an invisible wall between us that neither of us dared to cross. His house reflected that distance. Minimalist to the extreme. Almost no decoration, no family photos on the walls, no childhood memories. Just functional furniture and obsessive order. Except for one room. The back room on the first floor was locked. I had to search for an hour before I found the key, hidden inside a fake book in his study. When I finally opened the door, I understood why he had kept it locked. The room was an archive, wall-to-wall shelves filled with VHS tapes, all meticulously labeled with dates ranging from 1991 to 2023. There was video equipment, old cameras, lights, microphones, and on the back wall, photographs, hundreds of them, all of our family. Except something was wrong with the photos. They were too perfect, too staged. In each one, our parents, Meridian and Calix Castellan, smiled with smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Destin was always behind the camera or at the edge of the frame, watching. And me. In every photo, I seemed to be acting. Not smiling naturally, but executing a smile. Not playing naturally, but performing play. Like an actress following directions. I picked up one of the tapes at random, labeled Christmas 1995, Take 7. Take 7. I found an old VHS player in Destin's studio and hooked everything up in his living room. When I pressed play, the screen flickered to life showing our old family room. I recognized the place immediately. The house where we had grown up in the mountains of North Carolina, 30 miles from any neighbors. The date in the corner read December 24th, 1995. I would have been 9 years old. The scene showed Christmas morning. My mother was sitting on the couch in a blue fleece robe. My father was standing next to the Christmas tree. I was on the floor, wearing reindeer pajamas, looking at the presents under the tree with a carefully calibrated expression of anticipation. And then I heard Destin's voice behind the camera. All right, Oberon, when I say action, you're going to yell, "It's Christmas," and run toward the presents. Mom, you smile and say, "Christmas with the family is the best." Dad, you laugh and say, "Let's see what Santa brought." Everyone ready, and action. I did exactly as he had described. I yelled. I ran. My mother smiled and recited her line with the intonation of someone reading a teleprompter. My father laughed, but it was a mechanical laugh, without any real joy. "Cut," Destin said. "Oberon, you need more energy. You're being an excited little girl on Christmas Day, not a student reciting in class. Again from the beginning." The tape showed exactly that. The same scene repeated, and again, and again. Take after take, each one slightly different as I adjusted my performance according to Destin's directions. I watched with growing horror. I didn't remember this. I didn't remember acting out a Christmas. I remembered Christmases I had vague memories of opening presents, of being with my family, but they were hazy, incomplete, like memories of dreams rather than actual events. I put in another tape. Family dinner, September of 1997. Take 12. This one showed our family sitting around the dining room table. My mother was serving roast chicken. My father was carving the meat. I, now 11 years old, was telling a story about my school day. But the story was clearly scripted. Every word was measured, every pause rehearsed. And every time I deviated from the script, Destin would say, "Cut," and we would start over, tape after tape, scene after scene, birthdays, Thanksgiving, family trips, even mundane moments, doing homework, watching TV, playing in the yard. Each one carefully choreographed and recorded multiple times until Destin was satisfied. My heart was beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. What was this? Why had my brother done this? And why didn't I remember it? I kept watching, searching for some explanation. The oldest tapes dated back to 1991, when I was only 4 years old. In these, I was too young to memorize complex lines. So the scenes were simpler. Me playing with blocks while my mother watched, me eating while my father read the newspaper. But even these contained multiple takes, with Destin directing every movement. Oberon, take the blue block, not the red one. Mom, move your chair 6 inches to the left. Good. Now Oberon, build the tallest tower. And action. The more recent tapes were more disturbing. These were from after our parents died. It was just Destin and me, but the scenes continued. Me, now 19, 20, 21, acting out conversations with my brother. Scenes of brothers spending time together, shared meals, discussions about my college, all written, all rehearsed, all recorded, and I didn't remember any of it. Or did I? As I watched more tapes, something strange began to happen. Fragments of memories began to surface. Not complete memories, but sensations. The metallic taste of fear in my mouth. The fatigue of repeating the same action over and over again. The blinding light of the video lamps on my face. And then, on a tape dated 1998, I heard something that made my blood run cold. It was a family dinner scene. I was 12 years old. Halfway through the take, I stuttered on my line. Destin yelled, "Cut," with more anger than usual. Oberon, his voice was cold, controlled. "If you don't cooperate, you know what happens. Do you need me to remind you?" My 12-year-old self on the screen stiffened. The fear was palpable on my face. "No," I whispered. "I'm sorry, I can do it right." "Good, because we don't want a repeat of last month's incident, do we?" "No, please, no." "Then focus. Again from the beginning." What incident? What threat did she have over me? I frantically searched through the tapes looking for something labeled August or September 1998. I found one, but the label was different from the others. It just said, "Correction, August 1998. With trembling hands, I put it in the player. What I saw next was not a familiar scene. It was me, tied to a chair in what appeared to be the basement of our house. I was 12 years old, crying, pleading. Destant was facing the camera. I could see his reflection in a mirror behind me, holding something in his hand, a syringe. "This is the consequence of not following the script, Oberon," his voice said, calm and clinical. "I already explained this to you. You need to learn your role. You need to be convincing. The perfect family has no mistakes. Please, Destin, please. This will help you forget that you resisted. It will help you reset. And tomorrow, we'll start again. And this time, you'll do it right." The needle pierced my arm. The camera kept rolling as I struggled, screamed, and finally collapsed into the chair. The tape continued. It showed Destin untying me, carrying my unconscious body upstairs, laying me down on my bed, as if I had only had a nightmare, as if nothing had happened. I turned off the player and vomited on the wooden floor of Destin's living room. My whole body was shaking. My mind was trying to process the impossible. My brother had drugged me. He had punished me for not acting right in his recordings, and somehow he had erased my memory of the event. How many times had this happened? How many corrections had I undergone? I searched for more correction tapes. I found 8 in total, spread out over my childhood and adolescence. Each one showed the same thing. Me tied up, me resisting, Destin injecting me with something, my memory being erased. And then I found something even worse, a box of notebooks hidden behind the tape shelves. I opened them with hands that no longer felt like my own. They were diaries. Destin's diaries dated from 1991 to the days before his death. March 15th, 1991. The experiment begins today. Oberon is 4 years old, the perfect age. Young enough to be malleable, old enough to follow simple instructions. The parents have agreed to participate. I explain the importance of the project to them, to document a perfect family, to create an archive of ideal normality. They understand that sometimes it will be necessary to use unconventional methods. They understand that the greater good justifies the means. July 22, 1993. Oberon is becoming more difficult to manage. At 6 years old, he is beginning to question why we repeat the same scenes. I had to introduce the first correction protocol. The ketamine works better than expected. Not only does it make him more manageable during recordings, but it fragments his memory of the sessions. When he wakes up, he remembers experiencing the events, but he doesn't remember acting them out. Perfect. December 8th, 1998. The August incident was a setback, but the correction worked. Oberon no longer remembers resisting. He no longer remembers the injections. His childhood memories are exactly where I need them to be. Fragmented, vague, replaced by the scenes we have recorded. When he thinks of Christmas 1995, he doesn't remember the 17 shots. He remembers a happy Christmas. The narrative I created has become his reality. August 11th, 2009. The parents are no longer necessary. Their car accident was unfortunate but necessary. They were beginning to question the project. They threatened to tell Oberon the truth. I couldn't allow that. Now it's just Oberon and me, and I can control the narrative completely. The notebook fell from my hands. My brother had killed our parents. It hadn't been an accident, and for 18 more years, he had continued to control me, recording me, erasing my memory, constructing a false reality that I had accepted as truth. Why? Why do this? I kept reading, searching for answers. March 3rd, 2015. I have completed my analysis of the first 1,000 hours of recording. The patterns are clear. It is possible to create fully functional memories through repetition and chemical suggestion. Oberon is now 23 years old and does not remember a single scene being recorded. To her, her childhood was normal. A loving family, happy moments. Exactly the narrative I constructed for her. October 17th, 2018. The true purpose of the experiment is being revealed. It wasn't just about controlling Oberon. It was about understanding how families are constructed, how memories are fabricated, how reality is just a consensus that we can manipulate if we control the narrative enough. And I have proven that it is possible. I have created an entire childhood. I have erased years of trauma and resistance. I have replaced truth with fiction, and the fiction has become truth within my subject's mind. Subject. She called me her subject. January 8th, 2023. I can no longer continue. The weight of what I have done is unbearable. I have watched the tapes thousands of times. I have seen the fear in Oberon's eyes as a child. I have seen how that fear was gradually erased and replaced with the mask of happiness that I trained her to wear. I have created a monster, not Oberon, me. I am the monster. But I cannot undo what I have done. If I tell her the truth, I will destroy the only reality she knows. If I destroy the tapes, the evidence of my crime disappears. but the damage remains. There is no right choice. So I will choose the only option that ends this. I will leave the tapes for her. I will leave the journals. And when she finds them, she will finally know the truth. She will finally understand why her life always felt like a performance, why her memories were always vague, why she could never really remember her childhood clearly. I hope she can forgive me, but I know she shouldn't. No one should. That was the last entry. 3 days later, Destin hanged herself. I sat on her living room floor for hours, surrounded by tapes and notebooks, trying to process the impossible. My entire life had been a lie. Every memory of my childhood had been implanted. Every happy moment had been acted out, edited, repeated until I forgot I was acting. And worst of all, parts of me had known. Deep in my subconscious, fragments of the truth had remained. That's why I had always felt like I was playing a role in my own life. That's why I could never remember specific details from my childhood. That's why the memories felt like scenes from a movie rather than events I had actually experienced, because they were. Over the next few days, I forced myself to watch more tapes. I needed to know. I needed to see the whole truth, no matter how much it hurt. I watched my 6th birthday recorded 14 times until my expression of surprise satisfied Destin. I watched Thanksgiving 1996, where my mother forgot her line and Destin yelled at her until she cried, then gave her something, probably the same drug he gave me, and we reshot the scene with her smiling obediently. I watched my high school graduation, which I thought I remembered as a happy day. On the tapes, I saw that it was filmed in 9 different takes, with Destin positioning every person, every smile, every hug, until the spontaneity seemed perfectly natural. I saw scenes from my college life. Destin drove 2 hours every weekend to visit me. I believed it was because he missed me, because he was a loving brother. The tapes showed the truth. Every visit was a recording session. Brothers spending time together. Casual dinner. Walk around campus. All acted out, all recorded, all added to the archive. And I found something that finally made me understand the depth of his control. A tape from 2015. I was 29. The scene showed a conversation between Destin and me in a cafe. We were discussing my relationship with my then girlfriend, Rhiannon. I was telling him about our problems, seeking brotherly advice. But on the tape, I could see what I hadn't been able to see then. Every word I said was a line Destin had written. Every concern I expressed was one he had planted, and his advice was designed to sabotage the relationship. "I think you need space," he said on the tape. "Maybe you should take some time off, focus on yourself for a while." And I had. I broke up with Rhiannon 2 weeks later. At the time, I thought it was my decision. Now I understood. Destin had written the script, and I had simply followed the directions. How many decisions in my life had really been mine? How many had been implanted by my brother through years of conditioning and manipulation? The most terrifying answer was, possibly none. I called my therapist. I had been seeing one for years for what was diagnosed as generalized anxiety and mild dissociation, and told him everything. At first, he thought I was having a psychotic episode, but I sent him photos of the tapes, the journals, Destin's notes. "You need to come home immediately," he said, "and you need to contact the authorities. This is documented abuse, possibly murder as well, if what the journals say about your parents is true." I called the police. They came. They looked at the tapes. They looked at the journals. They opened an investigation into my parents' deaths in 2009. They exhumed their bodies. The coroners found evidence that the accident had been caused by tampering with the car's brakes. Destin had killed our parents. He had murdered to protect his experiment, and I had lived with their killer for years without knowing it. I had loved my brother, trusted him, followed his advice, because he had trained me to do so, because he had erased my ability to question his authority. The case became public. The media called it the case of the acted family. Psychologists and criminologists wanted to study the tapes. Academics wrote articles about mind control techniques and memory manipulation. My life became a case study, but no one could give me what I really needed, my real memories, because they didn't exist. The real memories had been systematically erased over decades. What remained were only fragments, flashes of fear, feelings of disorientation, the metallic taste of drugs in my system, that did not form a coherent narrative. My therapist helped me process what he called ritualized abuse and extreme coercive control. He explained that what Destin had done was create a one-person cult, with him as the absolute leader and me as the programmed follower. Your parents were probably victims too, initially, she said. Destin likely manipulated them into participating, telling them it was an art project or a harmless social experiment. By the time they understood the magnitude of what he was doing, they were too involved, too complicit. And when they tried to stop him, he killed them. I finished. She nodded sadly. I spent months trying to reconstruct who I really was underneath all the layers of conditioning. It was like peeling an onion, except that every layer I removed revealed only another layer of manipulation. There was no solid core of me waiting to be discovered. That's the real horror of abuse of this kind, my therapist explained. They don't just steal your past. They steal your sense of identity. They leave you wondering, who am I if everything I believed about myself was constructed by my abuser? The answer I finally found was this. I would have to build a new self, not recover the old self. That never really existed, but create a new one from scratch. I quit my job as a teacher. I couldn't stand in front of students and teach history when my own history had been fabricated. I sold the house in Destin. I donated everything except the diaries and a few key tapes, which went to forensic and investigative archives. I moved across the country to Oregon, where no one knew me. I changed my name, from Oberon to Zara. A small change, but enough to feel like a new person starting over. And I began intensive therapy. 2, sometimes 3 sessions a week, working to separate the implanted memories from any fragments of real experience I could recover, working to understand which parts of my personality were authentic and which parts had been written by Destin. The process was agonizing. Each session meant confronting another layer of lies. Each breakthrough meant losing another piece of the reality I had believed I knew. But slowly something began to emerge. Not a complete and coherent self, but something authentic. Preferences that I knew were mine because they contradicted Destin's scripts. Emotions that arose spontaneously without the filter of, how should I feel in this scene? Decisions I made without first hearing my brother's voice in my head. One day, almost a year after finding the tapes, I had a breakthrough. I was walking through a forest near my new home when suddenly I had a flash of memory. Not one of the polished, perfect implanted memories, but something raw, fragmented, real. I was maybe 5 years old. I was in the woods behind our house. Destin wasn't there. My parents weren't there. Just me, exploring, discovering things, laughing because I had found an interesting insect. It was a simple memory, trivial even, but it was mine, truly mine. A moment that had happened outside of Destin's control, outside of his cameras, outside of his scripts. I cried right there in the middle of the woods, because that tiny memory, that 5-second fragment of childhood autonomy, was proof that I had existed outside of my brother, that some version of me had been real, even if only in stolen moments when no one was watching. I began to search for more of those moments. I called them my wild memories, fragments of experience that had escaped Destin's archive. They were rare, brief, often confusing, but they were mine. A moment at school when I was alone in the bathroom, practicing facial expressions in front of the mirror, trying to understand why mine always felt fake. A moment late at night when I woke up and wandered around the house, watching my sleeping parents, wondering why they always looked different when they didn't know I was watching them. A moment in college when I was drunk for the first time and felt something like freedom, as if the drug was temporarily disabling Destin's conditioning. These fragments didn't form a coherent narrative, but they formed something more important: evidence of resistance. Evidence that some part of me had always known something was wrong, that I had been fighting Destin's control on a subconscious level even while consciously obeying him. 2 years after the discovery, I received a letter. It was from a woman named Ianthe who had seen the news coverage of my case. She wrote to me because something in my story resonated with her. "My brother made recordings too," she wrote. "I thought he was crazy, but when I saw your story, I understood. He also made us act out family scenes. He called it preserving perfect moments. I never thought of it as abuse until I saw what happened to your family." I met with Ianthe 3 months later. Her story was different from mine. Her brother had been less systematic, less brutal, but the patterns were eerily similar. Control through documentation, manipulation of the family narrative, the insistence that replaying scenes made them more real. "He never used drugs like your brother," she told me, "but I don't think he needed to. He convinced us it was normal, that all families did this, and we were too young to know otherwise. We found more people, not many. This type of abuse is rare and specific, but enough to form a small support group. Survivors of acted families, we called ourselves. We all shared the same struggle, trying to separate real memories from staged ones, trying to understand who we were outside the roles we had been assigned. Now, 3 years later, I'm still in therapy. I probably always will be. But I've built something resembling a life. I work as a consultant for organizations that deal with abuse and coercive control. I give talks on how to recognize manipulation. I help other survivors navigate their recovery. And I've made a decision about the tapes. I could have destroyed them. I could have erased all evidence of Destin's experiment, but I decided to keep them. Not all of them. Some were too painful to keep, but a selection, as evidence, as testimony, as a reminder. Because the true horror of what Destin did to me wasn't just the physical or chemical abuse. It was the theft of reality itself. It was the way he turned my entire life into a performance, my identity into a role, my memories into fiction. And the only way to fight that is with the truth. The ugly, documented, undeniable truth of what happened. The tapes are that truth. Sometimes I still watch them. Not the fabricated happy scenes, but the correction ones. The ones that show the fear in my childish eyes. The ones that captured my resistance before it was erased. I watch them because I need to remember that resistance existed. That the girl tied to that chair fought back. That she didn't just accept what they were doing to her. That girl is still in me. Fragmented, traumatized, but real. More real than any of the polished versions of myself that Destin created. And some days, when I look in the mirror and wonder who I really am, I remind myself of this. I am the person who survived. I am the person who finally saw through the lies. I am the person who is writing her own story now, without directors, without scripts, without multiple takes, until the truth is convincing enough. My life is no longer a performance. It is chaotic, imperfect, often painful, but it is mine. And that, after a lifetime of living someone else's vision, is something worth holding on to. The tapes are stored in a storage unit now, labeled, cataloged, preserved. I don't look at them often, but I know they're there. Because unlike my brother, I believe in real truth, not manufactured truth. And the real truth is this. He stole my childhood, but he didn't steal my future. That's still mine to write. No cameras, no scripts, no rehearsals. Just life lived moment by moment, as authentic and messy as it should be. That is the ultimate revenge against Destin's experiment, to live without acting, to exist without being directed, to remember without my memories being rewritten, to be free.